Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to another Monday night to the political consciousness of West Coast Steeler fan to an imperfect union. Um, I'm going to start out tonight talking about yesterday, and yesterday was actually Father's Day, and we always talk about the importance of the father and the obligations of the father. But one of the things that I have found that has been missing is not a father, but a dad. And I make very rigid distinctions between a father and a dad. A birth father supplies semen. And in some cases, a financial obligation under penalty of law. But a dad, on the other hand, is much more intimate and much more vital a relationship between a father and son or a mother and daughter. But in this particular case, we're talking about dads and the influence of a dad. Uh, I see Mr. Carroll is here, and I'm sure he's going to have some things to say about this. And that considering that he is the father of a young daughter. But whether it is a daughter, which I think is probably even much, uh, it is very important to have a relationship, that father and daughter relationship. We always talk about that, always daddy's little girl, so forth and so on. But when you're talking about shaping the mind of a young man, you're talking about a role model. A lot of times it does not come from the birth father, but that influential male figure in his life, that he has that term, that familiar term of dad. And well, Bill, what do you think? I, I put up this statement that all birth fathers are dads,
Right.
and that perhaps we have gotten away from the concept and the idea of not fathers, but actual dads in the neighborhood and as role models. Do you agree
Well,
with that?
yeah, yeah. So there's as the old saying goes, there's more than two trains. There's two trains, or maybe more than two trains running here. Um, Fatherhood isn't simply about being a surprise sperm donor. The reality of being a father goes far beyond getting someone, or should go far beyond getting someone pregnant. That's something that is incredibly easy to do. It's can be literally done in under a minute in some cases, and from what I hear, and And for some people, that's the extent of it, right? And that's not the role of the father. I mean, that's part can be a part of fatherhood, but fatherhood is that person that wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and goes through with feeding and potty training and picking people up from sleepovers and dropping people off at sleepovers and helping people with math homework, even though you're terrible at math yourself. And, and you talked specifically about, how a lot of coaches or other sort of men in the community end up stepping into that breach, and grandfathers, right? My father was raised by his grandparents. My father's grandparents, Thomas Carroll and Sarah Carroll. Thomas Carroll never in his entire life set foot inside of a school, ever, once, not one day. He was born, we think, 10 to 12 years after the end of chattel slavery. Because he was born at home, he was illiterate, and quite obviously his parents, who were slaves, were illiterate. So we're going off of essentially a guesstimate of the man's age, right? No one really knows when Thomas Carroll was born at home to slaves. We know that on the slave census for that part of Surrey County, they estimated that he was, a child of, I mean, you know how it is. They can't get our ages right now, let alone in the days of slavery, James. So he could have been anywhere literally from 6 to 12 in the last slave census that was done for the state of Virginia. So he was somewhere, we think, born somewhere between about, 1874 to 1880, maybe, right? Somewhere in there, we think. We don't know. He didn't know. Nobody knows. Well, I mean, maybe the white folks knew, but they didn't write it down. They didn't write down his birth date. And Sarah, similar deal, but we have a slightly better read on her age. We're almost not 100%, but we're fairly confident, I guess is how I put it, that she was born in about 1880. Let me see, what was it? We finally sort of did some work and figured out. Let's see. We believe she was 94 when she died. And she died in 69. So what's that? Yeah. So we have reason to believe she was born about 1885. I think is what the working theory is. And once again, born at home to illiterate people. She did go to school for about 3 years. So she has about a third grade, roughly, education, which is an extremely smart woman, despite only having about a third grade education. So they raised all of their own children and many of their children's children, and outlived many of their children, which unfortunately wasn't that rare to people who were born in that time in the country. A lot of those children died young. Sarah Carroll was pregnant a total of 22 times in her life, James. She brought 14 of those children. 14 of those children were born alive. So that's 8 children, 8 children who were born dead or died shortly after birth of her 22 pregnancies. Of the 14 that lived, she managed to outlive something like 8 or 9 of them. Though they lived to be in their 40s or 50s, she lived to be in her 90s, we think. Once again, it's a lot of guesstimation there. But the point I'm making is that Thomas Carroll was still, despite being entirely illiterate, was a man who was respected in the Black community of Spring Grove, Virginia. And I say Spring Grove because they actually were not in Spring Grove proper, which sounds funny to say because Spring Grove barely exists. But they were in an unincorporated part of Surrey County. The closest courthouse was in Spring Grove. Nobody was born in a hospital until sometime in the 1920s, probably. So my father was born in a hospital because he wasn't born in Surrey County. He was born, his mother had run away or was carried away, whatever. There's still controversy in the family about how she came to be in New York, but he was born in Brooklyn. And so part of why my father was such a big Brooklyn Dodgers fan was being actually born in Brownsville, but mostly it was Jackie Robinson. But Thomas Carroll raised a bunch of people's children. Some of them were his children's children. Some of them were nieces and nephews, grandnieces and grandnephews. And Sarah and Thomas Carroll raised, between their own children and other people's children, probably 50 children. I might be shorting them. 50 is probably a fairly low ball estimate, James. because they were solid human beings. And people don't talk about this very often, but when slavery ended, I mean, we talk about trauma. Think about how traumatic slavery is. And how did it end, James? Was there like a process where they put you in a like one of those, like flotation tanks, and you listened to ambient music and you smoked a little ganja? No, no, no. That was not how it ended, right? You didn't have a nice process of deslavification, James, right? That wasn't how it worked. Were you seeing a therapist? No, black people don't see therapists now. They certainly were seeing them at the end of slavery. So think about this. You hear rumors that you're free, right? And you've heard stuff like this before. Like, it's just like anything else. Like, yeah, I've heard this one before. You sure? Are you really sure? Then you hear like 2 plantations over that everyone's run off and nobody's chasing them. You're still not completely sold on it. Like, this could still be a trick. Okay, I'm going to try leaving. You gather all your stuff, your courage. You still can't read, can't write. They've kept you as much as possible from knowing exactly where you are, in fact, right? They don't want you to know exactly where you are, right? Because if you know exactly where you are, you're more likely to run off because you know where the rivers are, you know where the railroad is, if you know exactly where you are. So you've been kept in as close to perfect ignorance as is humanly possible, right? So it's not just you can't read and write. They don't want you to know how far you are from anything, right? You know your plantation and maybe the next plantations in this direction, this direction, this direction, maybe in the next 4 directions. And that's all you know. And that's all they want you to know. Now, you hear rumors because, nothing like ignorance to get rumors going. So we just had Juneteenth, obviously. And it's talks specifically about Galveston, Texas. But that's not just Galveston specific. All over the nation, people got word of freedom at different paces in different places. And many of them didn't believe it and trust it, like I said. But when they finally do say, okay, we're free, what does that really mean? You don't have any money. You have maybe the clothes on your back, depending upon how well you've been treated. Some slaves had their own little private garden, so maybe you've got that food that you've raised for yourself. There are a few slave holders that reportedly, to favorite slaves would give them a freedom suit, right? Well, you've been, faithful to me X number of years, Rastus, here's a freedom suit, right? So a suit of good clothes. This is something that I've been trying to research to find if it's just one of those like legendary things that actually happened, but I'm doing a lot of reading on that. But it may have happened a couple of times, but usually you have nothing or close to nothing. So you want to be a farmer because that's the only thing you know how to do. Generally, if you were a field hand, is farm. Well, you don't have money, so what ends up happening? You end up going to work for your former master as a tenant farmer or a sharecropper, and in order to purchase the things you need, the seed, the farm tools, and of course your working land that belongs to them. So you end up essentially selling yourself back into a rental agreement that's, it's not quite slavery because you theoretically could get out of it and be free, but you got to pay them off, right? Whatever the land costs to farm, whatever the feed costs. If you also purchase an animal from them, they take that out of your future earnings. And of course, if you have a bad year, a bad harvest, guess what? You're in the hole, right? You're in the red. So now you go into the next growing season owing them more than you owed them the year before. So you have to stack several good years in a row together to get out of that hole. All of this to say that Sarah and Thomas Carroll he was 100% illiterate. She was, she could read at probably about a 3rd grade level. But these two individuals, with between them a 3rd grade education added together, raised several generations of children, sent some of them to college. I mean, got them started. They didn't have enough to send them to college. They were, they didn't have that kind of money, but they could get you to a town where a college was located with an extra $20 or $30 and hopefully you would get a job or a scholarship or something and go forward from there. My dad got drafted in the Army. That's how he finished his education. But they managed to raise a bunch of children, right? I mean, a bunch. They managed to, by the time they died, own 112 acres of land. I don't know if there aren't words I'm good with words, to make it clear what an amazing accomplishment that is for two individuals born right after slavery, basically, with virtually zero education between the two of them, getting cheated and every bad deal that everyone could throw at you, right? People cheating you and shorting you and think of all the things that people did to ex-slaves, right? And people who were born right after slavery to keep them down. To by the time they passed away, own 112 acres of land. I don't know how to put it into words what they accomplished. And yes, they sent my father, off to Newport News, Virginia, where his aunt and uncle lived, with a little bit of money in his pocket, and go to college, right? Sure, right? Now they don't know anything about college. I mean, how could they? They barely know what school is at all, but they knew it was important, right? Sarah and Thomas Carroll, she could read the Bible, like that's what she could do, and she could tell him not to sign certain things. She could do enough math to say that doesn't add up, don't sign that, right? That was the extent of her education. She had about third grade education. He had a zero education. But education was important to them. They prized it. And there's one thing that I would say that's changed in our community is that desperation for education that we had right after slavery. Look at all the little schools that popped up all over the place. And some of them eventually became HBCUs, but even if they were in little churches and little whatever, people in their homes, in some cases, if they could read, they would teach everyone else around them, hey, come over, I'll teach you to read, right? There were no public schools in the Black community in the 1870s and 80s. And then they began to, like, the HBCUs began to pop up, but they were a handful of them. They were tiny and they weren't close to most people, right? If you're in Mississippi, you're going all the way to Tuskegee Institute. If you're in Arkansas, you're going all the way to Tuskegee Institute, right? Which my grandfather, my mother's father did, right? He, got on a buckboard with two horses and went from Fort Smith, Arkansas, which is by the Oklahoma border, to Tuskegee, Alabama to get educated. Think of what that takes, right? He doesn't know anybody in Tuskegee, Alabama. He's never seen it, but he knows there's a school there and goes. So I know we're talking about fatherhood, and I want to get back to just what that means. I became a father fairly late in life, right? I know a lot of people become a father very early in life, and I have the advantage of having lived a certain amount, right? I wasn't a person in their 20s or their teens. So by being in my 30s, I had like all the partying and everything out of my system, right? I wasn't interested in kicking it, right? I was very much ready to be a father in terms of, well, let me rephrase that. I was prepared for some of the aspects of fatherhood. Being ready to be a father is an oxymoron. Until you're a father, you're not ready to be a father. Like, then you're not really ready. You're figuring it out. But we had a drive in our community at one point. No matter how poor you were, how bad things you were, if you had a good brain, people would tell you, you've got a brain, go get educated. And they would make you go sometimes, even if they would have to take up collection at church, right? Which happened literally. And once again, in my own family, I could tell stories of people where the church said, you are too smart to be, digging ditches or whatever it is that you're doing, or, pounding fence posts, picking soybeans. I mean, all the things that you end up doing in these parts of the Deep South at the time, or even, not even in Virginia, forget the Deep South. At the time that I'm talking about, people say, you're too smart for this. They would take up collections, say, we're sending you to Baltimore, we're sending you to Norfolk, we're sending you to wherever it is, and go to school. And once again, these are people that's getting up and going. They don't know anybody. They don't have anything waiting for them. And what I think about now, I work with students all day long, right? That's what I do for a living. And just that thirst. And I'm saying that none of that some of my students do still have that, but like in our community as a whole, the drive to be a father isn't what it used to be, right? These men who had been slaves and had their children taken away from them so badly wanted to be fathers that some of them would walk sometimes hundreds of miles trying to find their children, right? And these are people who've kept in damn near perfect ignorance. They can't read, they can't write. They certainly can't read a map. If they can read a map, they better have hit that information very well. If you read a map and you're a slave, it's that when it gets out, it's not going to work out for you. So you're trying to find your children. You're asking people along the road. It upsets me that we no longer have some of those same levels of drive and desperation to accomplish certain things that we used to have within our community, even when things were worse. I mean, things are bad, but pretty much all of us at least got to go to a school at some point in our lives. Very few of us have worked literally from sun up to sundown in the hot sun. I mean, a few of us still do, but it's a very small percentage of people work like that, right? And most of them, frankly, to be perfectly honest, are not native born Americans. There's a few who still do, but that's not the majority, right? That kind of hard labor, they're still doing hard labor, don't get me wrong, but that kind of hard labor, the specific kind of labor I'm talking about, is almost gone because there's machines that do a lot of that stuff now. And when I meet young men who I know are fathers, including some of my students, and some of them, at least one of them I know, is desperately trying to make sure that he stays in his children's life, and someone's even fighting, literally, not fighting like a physical fight, but fighting legally in other ways to stay in the lives of his children. And I'm glad to see that. But there's a lot of young men who brag about how many kids they have. Literally will brag. I got, such and such and such and such and such and such.
I was one of them. I was one of them. Hey,
Oh,
badge of courage. Yeah,
right,
I got, X number of here, and
right over there,
there's one here. I
one
mean,
here,
Papa was a Rolling Stone. I mean,
right. What they call
I,
hood twins, right? Where they're the same
yeah,
age.
yeah,
The same age.
So I mean, that's where I made the distinction. I made a line,
Yeah,
kind of in the sand on what a father was and what a dad was.
sure.
And
And
fortunately, I had two men in my life that were on opposite ends of the fence, even though one was my birth father.
okay,
But because I never felt that closeness, I always felt that, I was always, little Jimmy, like
right,
always being compared,
right.
and then
Big Jim, right. I get it.
right, and then, you know, it, afterwards in my life, as a matter of fact, it was already after I'd been in the penitentiary. It was after I had already been through a few other things, but I found a man that was an inspiration. He was a veteran of the Korean War,
Hmm,
and we could sit down and actually have a conversation without him judging me,
right,
you know. And that was my biggest thing. Is like, not only was I treated as a son, but I also had someone that I could actually talk to, and
right.
that made a difference to me. So, where are you on that distinction between being a father and actual being a participant,
Yep,
which to me is being a dad? I mean,
right, right.
anybody can donate sperm, and uh,
Yep,
hey, for many years, like send money, and that was the obligation. That was my obligation, you know.
right, right,
I need Pampers. I need this. I need that. All
right,
right. Well,
right.
as
Shoes for
long
school, right? Yeah,
right,
yeah,
well, as long as I had, the money there for, back to school clothes and, so forth and so on, then I figured, hey, I'm doing my job.
right. And that's
Little,
the problem. We've reached a point, and some people don't even do that. So, but we've reached a point where the bar keeps getting lowered, James. And there's people bragging about the fact that they do things for their own children. Like, wait, hold on. Like, you can't. How much? I can't be impressed. It's the old Chris Rock thing. Like, wait, hold on. You're asking to be praised for doing the thing that you're supposed to do. The bare minimum, right? We talk about being a provider, but that's the bare minimum. Uh, when you've potty trained a child, when you've taken them to their first day of school, when you've comforted them when like their best friend turned on them, and when you talk to them about what it takes to be successful in the world when they have talent and they're not using it, right? And they're thinking life is going to be easy, and you're telling them no, no, no. And yes, I realize that you've been spoiled, but you better not get too used to it because you're going to walk out this door pretty soon and the world's going to you in the face. And, and maybe kick you afterwards while you're down. The So here's what I'm going to mention. So I met my father's father exactly once. Grover Cleveland Brown, I think was his last name. I mean, so my mother's father was my grandfather, right? I had, he pushed me around his yard in a wheelbarrow. I would have his hat on sometimes. He would teach me how to identify certain birds, certain plants, and also the cool stuff. My father's father was this very quiet, taciturn man who was very awkward around my father. The one time that I saw the two of them together, I saw him. Actually, I take it back. I saw him twice. I saw him alive once, and I saw him in a casket once. But when I realized how different it was, when my father introduced this man to me as Grover, and there was this very tense moment as we stood there, sort of in the doorway, and this man that I would see once alive and once dead, sort of, tried to make sort of small talk with me and sort of looked at my father somewhat guiltily, and we were there for maybe an hour and a half, and then we got in our car and drove away. And the next time I saw him, he was in a casket. So I got to, in my life, I had a very involved father, but I got to see the difference between the two. Like my grandfather was my mother's father, and I knew all kinds of stories about his childhood and, where he was born, the first time he saw a motor car, as he used to call them, and all this stuff, right? How he met his wife, and all this stuff, right? This other gentleman who had another family. So my father's mother died young, and she had some both mental and physical maladies that kept her from being able to raise my father. So as I mentioned, he was raised by his grandparents. And this man, Grover, lived a little ways up the road with his family, right? And never, to my knowledge, during my father's life, acknowledged his existence, other than that time that they met. That if they met another time, I wasn't there. Maybe they met before I was born. I get the feeling that they didn't, though. Or if so, good God, if it was more awkward than that, I can't imagine, because it was I was a fairly small child, probably 9 years old or something. But my God, I knew what tension was even at that point. I knew what awkward was even at that point. I knew that these people didn't know each other, right? The way that they looked at each other, the way that they didn't embrace. I don't think they even shook hands. It was, yeah, it was a stark difference to see my mother with her father and her mother, and my father, his mother passed away long before, but see my father with this man, Grover, who he clearly didn't know, and apparently what he did know he didn't like. Is what was apparent to me as a child. Now, we never discussed this man. Really, I remember when he passed, I asked my father a few questions, and he said, I would like to be able to tell you, but I don't really know the answers to those things. Like he said, he had another family. To my knowledge, he never came to visit us. Right? And he said, if so, I've forgotten it. And that was as much as I knew about that man. I think, and other than his name was Grover Cleveland, I think his last name was Brown, and that's the extent of my knowledge of this man.
Well, I had a rather, as I mentioned, a strange relationship with my father, but my grandfather, who was actually my step grandfather, him and my father didn't get along, but it was my grandfather that taught me how to fish, that taught me
There you
how to
go.
hunt, that taught me the different life skills that I need, that he had learned as someone coming up from the South. Now,
Yep.
my grandfather couldn't read either. I had to read the bills to him, different things, so, it was like I was saying, I went from teaching my grandfather how to read to now teaching my great nephew how to read. But
Right.
but that's a different
Right.
conversation.
Yeah.
Mr. Scott, uh, how are you doing this evening?
You're doing very good. I'm enjoying your conversation, and I wanted to ask Bill, you were talking about your relative Grover. Now, where was this person from?
So to my knowledge, and once again, this man was discussed very little, as I want to make very clear.
Okay. Okay.
Still in Surrey County. So my father was born in Brooklyn, but grew up in Surrey County. His mother was born and grew up in Surrey County. She died, as I mentioned, died young. She had a bunch of physical and mental disabilities of various sorts.
So this is all in New York.
No. She was only in New York for a short time. She had run away, I think, or had been sent away because she was pregnant, right, out of wedlock. So they sent her away. She had the baby, then she came back. And so my father was born in Brownsville, Brooklyn, but was there for a very short amount of time in his life. But he always, had a love for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Once again, I think a lot of that was Jackie Robinson. But as a child, she began to get sicker, both mentally and physically. Eventually, untreated diabetes is what her cause of death was, but she had other things going on with her as well. She drank, I think in part to try to quiet the voices in her head. Once again, even now, Black people don't seek, mental health counseling
Well, see,
but
Bill,
I mean,
but they didn't have access to it.
right. I was going to say, like,
They didn't have access.
right.
They
That's what I would
had
say.
no
There was
access to
only
it.
one hospital within driving distance, and it was a white
Thank
hospital.
you. Thank you.
So yes, if you had a physical or a mental malady, you treated it at home the best you could. And very often, if it was a mental malady, the best you could was moonshine. So that
Home
medicinal
remedies.
moonshine,
Remedies.
I guess. But so yes, Willie, my father's mother, who died, 30 something, 40 something, I don't know, years. I think she died in the late 1940s, many years before I was born. No, not 40 something, 20 something years probably before I was born. I don't even know what exactly her mental disease was because, well, she never saw a doctor.
Hold on, guys. Let's get back on track here.
Sure.
Mr. Scott, I asked a question about. Well, actually, I made the statement that all birth fathers aren't dads, and the second part of that was, have we gotten away from being dads and are just trying, are satisfied fulfilling the role of father, which a father, to me, there's a distinct difference between a dad and a father. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, maybe when you get to some higher levels, you might see, some fathers that are being active in their kids' lives, but the dads, the ones that used to take their sons to football practice, the one that used to sit down and like have conversations with their son, like, son, you're going to be 13, you're going to be a teenager, this, that, and the other, a dad, maybe you and your dad go fishing together. In other words, I consider dad that intimate relationship where you go deeper than just so and so's son. What's your thoughts on that? Growing up in a family where you always talk about how your family always knew where you were. They made sure that you were on that straight and narrow. What's your thoughts between
Well,
being a father and being a dad?
I mean, I think it comes down to somewhat role models. I mean, like I grew up with my father, who grew up in Chicago in the tenements. Okay, he went to DuSable High School, the homecoming king. He was, and then my mom graduated from Parker High School in Birmingham, where the principal was the father-in-law of Colin Powell. Okay,
Oh,
Colin Powell's father-in-law, his wife's father was the principal at that school at Parker, and before that, his father, and then his wife taught at Parker, And Condoleezza Rice lived across the street, even though she didn't go to Parker. She was able to get into something else. So when I say that, the way I grew up, for example, like when we first moved into our house, my dad, he never cut grass. He never did anything like that. And I said, well, Dad, why don't you cut the grass? He said, I lived in Chicago. We didn't have no grass. I grew up in Chicago. We didn't have grass in Chicago. So he came from a different thing. Whereas my grandfather from Talladega and Birmingham, oh, they had gardens and they taught me how to garden. And well, they had me on ladders washing windows. And I mean, when I stayed with them, I mean, it was like a military camp. I had to drive grandma to the store. I had to drive her to church. I had to. And so this is where now being a father has been taken. Example two, my dad, like I said, he never did anything around the house. He said that, you guys get out there and do it. Well, I lived in the tenement houses. But my grandfather, he's up on top of the roof, roofing this house. He's outside doing the concrete. He built a little patio out in the backyard with the concrete. I watched him lay it out there. And so we don't have those kind of role models anymore to really show us how to basic lives, just in our homes, how to do anything. I call somebody, I got some kind of insurance or something on my boiler, and I call these people to come out. Well, we don't work on the boiler. You have to call a plumber. I'm like, well, hell, why am I paying you every month? You say it's covered. Well, you have to call the plumber. Call the plumber. Okay, they come out. They don't give you no estimate now. You got to pay them to come out. They don't just come out and say, this is what it'll cost. You got to pay them to come out. And so
Oh,
this
that's a
is
service charge. Come on, Mr.
this is the world. Okay, so then another, and I call this guy Hero. He's on TV. $69. He'll come out. He looks at it and says, $1,500. You need a new pump on your boiler. I said, hell, I only paid $5,000 for the whole boiler. Why is it $1,500 for just the pump? Well, so I paid them and shooed them out of the house and called my buddy, pipe fitter, plumber. Scott, give me $200. He put the thing together in 5 minutes. But it's the world we live in now. This is the world. This is what we're up against now. And the fathers, the parents, they feel the brunt of this. These schools aren't doing what they. I look at my dad's and my grandfather's yearbooks. All these kids had suits on. All these kids had suits on, man.
Yep.
They're standing with their teams, their track team. They're standing at attention.
Yep.
To do what they had to do. We don't have we have no rhyme or reason anymore.
Class orators, class poets, right? Yep.
No more rhyme or reason. So yeah, it's a tough beat. It really is. To churches were always a big thing in our community. They're still there, but people are kind of what happens is people go with the flow of what they've been taught. They can. When I used to go to church, I had a suit on. I had a suit and a tie when I went to church. I couldn't go in with no jeans, shorts, tennis shoes. I couldn't go in there with that. But we don't have that rhyme or reason or order anymore. So, I mean, we have to go along with it. And as parents, growing up, my kids did what I said, dude. But their kids, I mean, I have to realize that they're the parent now. I don't have any, even though my grandma, I grew up, she would whoop me. She would whoop me. She would pay no attention to mom, whoop me, think nothing of it. But my kids, they have their own dad, they have their own, and I don't feel I can intrude on that. Does that make any sense to you guys? I don't know.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. I mean,
it definitely makes sense, but why? Once again, now, I think that goes back to the closeness of the family, and like you said, Mr. Scott, your grandmother, and any grandmother on the street, if she saw you doing wrong, as far as that was concerned, at least that's the way it was on my street, you know. And usually by the time you got home, grandma already got a telephone call. So and so cutting up, so and so did this in school. I mean,
Yep.
so like you said, now you don't feel comfortable intruding in the lives of your children's children. But what about your position in the family as an elder,
Um,
Mr. Scott? I mean, you present a history of your family. You have these books that
well,
I mean,
yeah,
is there a certain
yeah.
amount of you know uh, 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 like I said, eldership? What happened to that as being a part of the
Well,
family?
it's James. It really comes down to that with my kids. Okay, yesterday was Father's Day. Okay, and they text me Happy Father's Day. They 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 text me Dad blah, and then they might come by. I don't know that there is that. I don't know that there is that respect for your elders and parents with the younger generation. I mean, I'm just looking at it from the outside. I really don't know that there really is. I know my son, he was really close to his grandfather. My grandfather is 100 years old.
Wow.
And he would take her and him and her, they would go walking, go around the Mall of America and walk around. But and my son, he liked to eat because they would take him to dinner when they got through with the walking. But he really loved his grandparents. And some of the other kids, I don't know. I mean, there's several other first cousins, but he's the one that always goes and takes care of it. He's the one that always, because it's the way he thinks about it. But I think in general, the younger generation doesn't have, for whatever reason, appreciation of their parents and elders. I mean, that's the feeling that I get.
Good evening, Dr. Casey. How are you this evening?
Hey, hey, hey.
Yeah.
Oh, I can
Uh,
barely see you, Dr. Casey. So I want to.
we're going to have to get you a stronger pair of glasses there, Mister. Mr. you, you you look like Stevie Wonder trying to see over there, like.
Or you need to wipe the lenses.
uh, Dr. Casey, we were discussing the difference between being a father and being a dad. And as I said, I made a very distinct difference because anyone can be a father, but it takes a special man to be a dad to his children. And I think that that's a very special uh, title, even more than father, because like I said, anybody can be a father. But what's your thoughts on that when you are dealing with the different dynamics of the family?
So, first, I want to address what Mr. Scott was saying when I jumped on. And his I'll wait till we get back. But him talking about that younger children or this young generation don't have a respect for their parents. And he specifically mentioned the grandparent. And a lot of times what it is that the children are going to admire and love the most whoever spends the most time with the child, whoever nurtures the child most, whoever is there kind of guiding the child. If that person, if the parents aren't the ones that's in place, and the difference between previous generations and our generation was faced with all the parents that needed to go get a job and work all the time and then barely had time for their children. But previous generations, they were the people, the mothers, the fathers were the people that was actually spending the most time with their children. So it wasn't a whole bunch of daycares and everybody is working. So the kid, like nowadays, children are at daycare from sun up to sundown, and the little time that they have with their parents is dinner, or if they eat dinner together. So it's hard to respect someone or to have that the same type of admiration for a person that is, shaky as far as presence, as far as being there, and actually being a dad versus a father. Like you said, anybody can be a father. Anybody can put sperm in a person and father a child, but actually being present, being a guide, being a person that your child feels like they can go to, that's a whole different thing. A lot of people will pick up their kids and just have them like they babysitting as fathers. And at a young age, children don't know, but as they get older, the things start clicking. And you know, um, most people still have respect. It's just how it's shown. Specifically, a lot of times, again, parents are working a lot, and because they're working so much, it's not a lot of time with their children. So, what are children going to respect? What are you looking up to? That's why a lot of times nowadays people are growing up workaholics and avoiding and having even people jumping into relationship real quick or trying to find love so much to where they're not even addressing the actual issues that they have in life, to where love can really manifest in a way that's going to be fulfilling. So yeah, it's deep when you think about parenting, because parenting sets the tone for whatever love language a child will develop, whether they like affection or not, whether they like gifts or not, whether they like acts of service or not. All of those things are kind of what is nurtured in you as a child. And I think that fathers, dads are some of the most important people in a child's life. I mean, mothers are important, but dads are almost greater of importance than mothers because of the structure that a father instills in a child, the guidance, the temperance that a father is supposed to help instill. Because a mother can only do so much, especially when it comes to boys. A mother can't teach a boy how to be a man. They need their fathers. Now, whether or not that father or dad is going to teach them the right thing or the wrong thing, be like up for grabs, but they still need that guidance. They need the man figure to show them what it is like to be a man, how to like when their balls get sweaty for the first time, what they supposed to do. A mother don't have balls to be able to tell a son that, so it's only so much that a mother can do. And I think there is, I don't know if it's the dads not knowing the importance that they hold in a son's or a daughter's life, because it's, oh my god, a lot of these women that we see with issues, they have issues because they daddy wasn't around. There was nobody telling them that they loved them, nobody telling them that they were beautiful, just somebody around to kind of say, don't do that, put some damn clothes on, like when I was younger, I used to try to wear little stuff, but I had a cousin and older cousins that was like, nah, you better go change. You can't wear that outside. Where you going with that on? Because they knew who they were as men and how they looked at people. So they helped guard me and protect me in a way to where now I have a different structure for how I present myself, where my lifestyle is, and what I'm willing and not willing to do. So but then you have dads and fathers that also teach their children to be manipulative, to be, go like it's varying. It depends on who that dad is. Because if that dad is a shitty person, then it my theory is that you either become just like your parents or you become totally opposite, because you
Right.
want to be so much better that you like, it almost disgusts you to be like your parent. But then there are some people that no matter how bad their parent is, they end up just like them. It's kind of like the luck of the draw and depending upon the personality of the child and the father.
What do you think there, Bill?
Oh well, about which part of that? So
Any parts you'd like
okay,
to address?
okay. So I do not know what it's like to be. I know what it's like to be a son, and I know what it's like to be a father to a daughter. And I've had young men in my life who I've been able to spend time with and maybe guide to a certain point. Uh, and I feel a certain amount of pride when I see them succeeding, but they're not my sons. I mean, they're not my sons in the sense of I didn't, you know, give them. I wasn't there when they were born.
Procreate.
I didn't, but I
Right.
certainly have been a part of their lives in some cases since some of them were in their teens, uh, and now they're grown men with careers and married and stuff like that. And I'm super proud of them. But I do have a teenage daughter, and that is an experience. That is an experience, and in the age of somebody, Mr. Scott was talking about grandparents, and so much of what used to be the job of parents or grandparents, things like that, is being done, not being done, but some of that room has been filled because the job isn't being done. Maybe make it more clear. The job is not being done, but the room that was the hole that used to be filled by parents and grandparents has been filled in many cases by stuff that they have found. And that stuff may come from YouTube. That stuff may come from Instagram. That stuff may come from, there's a bunch of different places it comes from, but they're getting ideas about how life should be lived. And yes, there are entire groups of young women who their primary female role model is somebody like Nicki Minaj or Cardi B or Kim Kardashian. We don't have to like it. We probably should not like it, but nature abhors a vacuum, right? That hole won't stay open. Just because you don't fill it doesn't mean it's not being filled. It's difficult in this age of constant information and misinformation surrounding all of us all day and all night. And when you don't have the power of discernment, and that's what it means to be a child, right? I was a very bright child, but I didn't have the power of discernment. I took in a lot of information, good, bad, and indifferent. And I was lucky that I had parents, and my parents encouraged me to take in all the information I could and said, let's talk about it afterwards, right? My parents, if they tell me to pick up a book, no matter how age inappropriate it was, they didn't say to put that book down. They said, go ahead, read that book, but we have to talk about it afterwards, right? My parents were very, they wanted me to explore. They wanted me to learn. They just wanted to make sure that they checked in and talked to me about, well, what did you think of that? What was that like? And it's like, oh, that was weird. Yeah, wasn't it? Let's talk about it. So the thing that I run into when my daughter is like going down because of the algorithm, a YouTube rabbit hole of watching like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson and a bunch of other people that I would not encourage her to watch or listen to, is to talk about it afterwards. And, well, what did you think of that? Well, why did you, they hear her lecturing me about the men's rights movement, right? Wow. Things I never thought would happen in my life for 800 Alex. So, and then they have to talk to her about, well, if you're a bunch of whiny white dudes failing somehow in America to feel fulfilled in a culture that does nothing but try to fulfill you, you could say you need a movement to take care of that. But I would suggest that the movement to make you feel good about yourself as a white man happened a couple hundred years ago already in America. And if it didn't work for you, nothing's going to fill that hole. And so, once again, I tried to follow my parents' example. I didn't say, oh, stop watching these horrible people. I said, yeah, let's talk about it, right? And when she's watching, Louder with Crowder and all of the crazy stuff that, once you watch one thing, YouTube's like, oh, you're going to love this. And then to see me sort of take apart their arguments made her realize, oh, okay, aha. Like, these aren't smart people. These are people who want to appear smart. And so she hasn't completely divorced herself from some of that stuff, but she has a different analysis of it. And I'm not trying to make her like me or make her like her mother or make her like her grandparents or whatever, because she's her whole self-contained, amazing human being I could not have designed her if I tried the way that she is. And I wouldn't change anything about her, even if I could, and I can't. But your children are going to be raised by somebody, right? Maybe somebody in your family, maybe somebody in your neighborhood, maybe somebody on television, maybe somebody on YouTube, maybe somebody on Instagram, on Twitter, who knows? But somebody's going to raise your children, right? You may not like what happens, but it's going to happen. And you have to decide how you're going to handle, because there's so much like this avalanche of stuff that comes to them every time they pick up their phone, every time they pick up their tablet, every time they turn on their computer. There's an avalanche of stuff coming at them, and you can try to block it. But I've decided not to do that. One, because the avalanche will crush you, right? I mean, you're big and strong, but you're not as big and strong as you think you are. You can't be with them 24 hours a day blocking the avalanche, right? So you have to instead try to teach them what the avalanche is as best you can. And then sometimes, like I said, I'll take apart some of these people. Like we'll watch the video, I'll pause it and debate them in essence, right? They can't answer back, so it's easier for me to win that way, but that's fine. And then pause that. Oh, what this person is saying. Well, what they're saying is this, but here's the facts, right? Here's what's actually happening. They're blaming the victim, right? They're saying this about that. And these guys who think that women owe them fealty or whatever, simply because they're some alpha male. First of all, anyone who says they're an alpha male, that's the best way to tell you you're not an alpha male, right? Anyone who's actually an alpha male never has to say it. Other people might say it, but if you're saying it, disqualifier. Mm-hmm. But I just sort of walk her through as best I can who these people really are, what they're really saying, and what's code, right? Because there's lots of code out there, and I want a teacher to be able to decode, but I can't teach her to think, right? She has to be able to think on her own, and when she thinks things are different from what I would want her to think, I can't say, no, your thoughts are wrong, right? Those are the wrong thoughts, right? I mean, first of all, I wouldn't want someone saying that to me. And second of all, that's the best way to turn them away from you, right? Now, we're not going to talk anymore because you told me my thoughts are wrong. No, I say, okay, here's how you arrived at some of these thoughts. Let's see if after we look at it this way, if you still think those things. If you do, cool. But if not, maybe you'll be open to something different.
Mr. Scott.
If I could just quickly, give a rebuttal to Bill in just a few words, because Bill has many words. I just have a few. But what Bill is doing with his daughter is he's paying attention. He's paying attention to what's going on with her. And he knows that, this is the same thing, you run into in different stages with the kids. Like my kids are grown now and they have their own daughters. And I want to tell them what to do. I want to, but they're grown men. These are there, and they're in charge of that. And I have to kind of find what my role is in their lives. Okay. It's not like when my grandmother, like I said, grandfather, they'd whoop you in a minute. They'd have no problem. They'd just turn you upside down and woof, it'll be over with, But I can't, I don't feel that I have that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's the differences in the way we look at things, and having worked so long in child protection, and knowing that you have to really, order your steps, so to speak. But yeah, I thought what Bill was saying, it just showed me that he's paying attention, and that now being a parent, it's a lot of work now. It's a lot of, these schools now. Can you really, my mom and them would send us to school and not really worry about it. They'd send us to school and I would take care of, they used to send us home from lunch. They would have a break. You go home for lunch and I'd have to fix the lunch and send everybody back to school. So I don't know that kids have that type of responsibility, or they're nurtured and brought up with that type of responsibility. I mean, as the oldest one, even today now, they call me because I'm the oldest one. And that's how we built our family. But I don't know what these days. Now we're in a different world, and you have to be adaptable, and you have to be adaptable quick.
Good evening, Miss Sims. How are you doing this evening?
Greetings, all. I'm not feeling that well, but I thought if I listen in to great minds, it might make me feel better. So
You're so kind. You're so kind.
Be listening. Yes, I'll be listening and chiming in here and there.
I thought you must have got our SOS because we sure enough was looking for you last week.
Indeed,
Oh,
indeed, indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
I miss the broadcast, but usually sometimes, not sometimes, but I get to watching the videos on the YouTube. So it's nice to be missed by somebody somewhere. Thank you.
so, Dr. Casey, what did you think about when uh, Mr. Scott says that he's not comfortable or he doesn't exactly know what that role is? Uh, has that also kind of contributed to the deterioration of that relationship between fathers and the family? Do fathers feel outcast now?
Well, I think that there's definitely a lot of space there because in today's world, um, so a lot of people was abused and mistreated growing up, which makes them extremely protective of their children. So now when their children are getting whooped, hit, or corrected, it's a lot of people that are like, you better not say nothing to my child. And then that breaks the structure of the family bond and unity because discipline is a part of love, and most people that feel loved at some point was disciplined by the person that they feel loved them because that person loved them enough to correct them while other people just let them do whatever they want to do. But the gap now is because parents are traumatized in a lot of cases, or now they don't believe in whoopings. When you try to do that, you can be fighting with a parent about how you're disciplining their child. So that definitely leaves a huge gap because, like was said before, I had neighbors that could correct me or whoop me or, you know what I'm saying, sit me down over their knee and, you know what I'm saying? Like, I had people in, it was not always family, it was neighbors. I had people that were allowed to do that because that's the type of bond that they had with my mother, or that's just the way the structure was back then. Back then, anybody could say something to you and correct you. It didn't matter who it was, as long as they were an adult and they weren't telling you anything that was wrong.
If
And
you're a
I
child, you
remember
stay in the child's place. If you're a child, you
exactly.
stay in the child's place.
So a couple of years back, before my father passed away, I went to Ohio, and one of my little cousins, a little boy cousin, was throwing rocks at a cousin that I don't necessarily care for, but he's still an adult. So I'm like, stop throwing them damn rocks. Like, I don't care. It doesn't matter that, I'm not close to this person or anything like that. You're a child throwing rocks towards an adult. Stop that shit. And when I told him that I was gonna whoop his mom came out like, "Well, I don't cuss him." Listen, sometimes kids don't listen until you tell a cuss word to them, and then they feel like, "Oh shit, we about to get in trouble for real." Because sometimes all that nice stuff does not go over well with kids. They hear you, and then they keep on doing whatever it is they're doing. But when you cuss, for whatever reason, most children, not all children, but a large majority, if you say ass or damn or anything, sit your ass. They be like, oh shit, let me sit down because it's really getting real now. Especially if you're not a parent that cusses at your children like that. Like,
Right.
I cuss in conversation now that my children are a little bit older, but when they was little, I didn't cuss. I was like, I've been like a saint as a mom, and now I'm trying to come out that box so that they won't expect so much of me that if I say something or do something, they like, oh my God, mom isn't, what's she doing? So, but sometimes you do have to go the extra mile. But sometimes when I was a kid, if somebody else corrected me, I probably listened faster than when my mama corrected me because if they go back and tell my mama or my grandmama, it's really gonna be a problem. And it's no fear no more. I don't know if it's not having the whoopings. I don't know what has made this upcoming generation so ruthless. But they are ruthless savages. They don't care about nothing. All they care about it, and it's not bad because they have their own mind. They are not as controlled and programmed as some of the older generations where if it's not dress right dress, it's wrong. they are more open on a lot of levels. And we kind of have to
but they're
guide them
not
through the
grown.
process.
They're
Like
not
Bill was, like
grown
Mr.
yet.
Carroll was saying, huh?
They're not grown yet. And
That
that's what
doesn't
they're
make a
at. They're
difference
not
because
grown
you
yet.
don't know what they're going through.
Well,
They might be going through some, like when I was 16, my mama tried to kill me. So a mother couldn't tell me that I wasn't grown after I went through being on my own, even before my mama tried to kill me. When I was on my own, when I was trying to feed myself, when I was like trying to figure out life myself and was nobody clocking me to make sure I was going to school, that I was home when I was supposed to be, I was grown. I was when you taking care of yourself and nobody is a guardian over your life, you think that you are grown because you're doing grown things. You're
Right.
learning grown lessons. I had a job. I was going to work. It's like when you and as you are doing things on your own, I was a very independent child. So, like for me, I was grown. So a person when I wrote my book at 23, and people would be like, "Well, what do you know at 23?" Well, shit, my mama tried to kill me. I was homeless for a little while. Joined the army, went to war. Like I've been around a few blocks before. But to an older person who was sheltered, y'all couldn't do a lot of things because of
but
segregation, because of racism. Y'all parents sheltered y'all a lot in a lot of ways that our
see,
parents are not sheltering us. They didn't let their guard
life
down.
life happens, Dr. Casey. I mean, my mother died. My brother was 15, my youngest brother, and he's been on his own since then. He basically has been on his own because my mother died. They lived together, and my dad was around. He remarried, but I mean, he's been on his own
I
since
bet you he
15
carried
years old.
himself a little bit different than everybody else too if he'd been on his own for that long.
He was a awesome dude. Awesome dude. Owns the house we lived in, builds cars. Unfortunately, he's had a stroke the last few years, and we have to take care of it. But I'm just saying,
Sorry to hear that.
life hands you. You got to play the cards you're dealt, as
So
Dad would
that's what
say.
these kids are doing. That's the part that you got to. That's the part whether it's the rap game or the parenting game. That's what
Why
you
am
got
I
to
being
realize that
attacked?
they
Why
are.
am I being attacked by the rap game? I think the rap game, it's a very interesting dichotomy. It has so much negative, but then it has some positive too. But I think the negative, to me, outweighs the positive. But I don't want to get into the rap game right now. It looks like my
That goes
reception is getting
along the
bad. My
line
reception is coming.
what Mr.
I don't
Carroll
know.
was saying about who's raising your children because there is instances where a Cardi B or Nicki Minaj may seem bad on the surface level, but if you look at the things that they try to do in the community, the way that they've tried to change themselves, it is like a double-edged sword. It's like a little bit good and a little bit bad. It's just what is that child going to focus on and what is that parent going to tell that child to focus on because I was listening to Little Kim hardcore when I was growing up, so I
No,
mean shit, it don't get too worse than
tell,
that. She was out the
tell
chain. She was
everything you
worse than
know.
all of them.
Tell everything you know.
And but Mr. Scott, how have you seen the different laws change as you went through your career? Did you hear me?
Laws. What about what laws were you talking
Well,
about?
like for instance, corporal punishment in schools. You know, when you and I were going to school, it was okay for the teacher to paddle you. It was all right for, like you say, if someone in the neighborhood saw you, misbehaving, for them to say something. But nowadays, if
Yeah.
you say something to a kid, they call you.
Oh yeah, you'll get a case. Yeah, like Dr. Casey, she would have got all kind of cases by now. But boy, yeah, but it's like it's the lack of order. It's a lack in your own home or your own neighborhood. It's really. I mean, I used to. You know the neighbors. You know. Now we just live in different times, and I think we all have to adjust. And this adjustment is very, very difficult. I mean, it really is. I mean, when we look at things there was a song. This group is a strange group. They called them Dyke and the Blazers, and they had a song called "Let a Woman Be a Woman, Let a Man Be a Man."
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you think of a time where things were much more simple, much things were much more in front of you, much more into a time now where we have to digest everything now. We have to digest. I mean, a person can come to see me and they're dressed as a man one day, and the next day they dress totally different. I mean, we've had to adjust so much, and I think with kids, they're exposed to all of these things. I mean, all these things that they can watch on cable, and I could never watch any of that foolishness. Oh God, my mom would turn that stuff off. You can't watch this. No, this is not. But now it's blasted. You can't control it anymore. They can get my granddaughter can get on her iPad, and I'm like, what do you? I don't even know how to deal with the iPad. I don't have an iPad. She got one. She's 5 years old. Oh, she maneuvers that thing just like you wouldn't believe. And so this is where we are now. And until we can adjust, we'll feel left out. And I'm not going to be left out. So I'm going to try to adjust to where this thing is going to keep up as long as I'm here.
Uh,
Uh,
good.
One of the things that struck me was when Dr. Casey was speaking, and it was profound when she said that. It made me think of my own childhood. That the adults looking out for each other's children had had to do with the relationships that the parents had with each other
Right.
in regards to looking out for the children, and those the people that were looking out for us cared about us, didn't want anything to happen to us, so it was out of a protective mode in regards to if we were getting into I live on a coal mining town, so there the train tracks were about 50 feet from my house. So all I had to do was go out the door and get on the tracks at the wrong minute. And the trains, I mean, successive tracks or getting going close to some chemicals or something. So it had to do with the relationships that the parents had with each other. And in regards to our the children nowadays, I could see when my children were in high school during the 90s and even during that time and earlier, I could see changes in society. And our children are exposed to a larger world and environment and people. I noticed a change when in school, for instance, where the teachers start wearing real casual clothes and start dressing like their students would. When the teachers start allowing the children not to call them Miss or Mrs., to call them by their first name. And I can remember when my children, they were in high school at that time, came home and were referring to a teacher by the first name. It really hurt my ears. I never heard of such a thing. I said, "What did you say?" And he lets us call us George or whatever. I said, "Well, no, you call him Mr. George or things like that." And then I also noticed in society when about the males um, during that times when it was real hip for the teenagers to wear one of the pants legs up and the others down. Then I started noticing that the men who could be their father, like in their 30s and stuff, they started doing the same thing as their children were doing. So it was like they were envying or looking at some way that their children were dressing and things like that. And so they started adapting visually to me. I could see that those changes taking place, and I realized, hey, something's going on here, and it's been different. I mean, it's taken a life of its own in regards to what we're speaking of nowadays. And I think a lot of parents are realizing they were that now we're reaping the benefits of what we didn't do in regards to relating to our children back then. And a lot of parents don't know how or what to do to get back on that track.
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there, and we'll discuss that after we get Brother Williams in, and he has another guest also. But Mr. Scott, I want to address this with you because we've been talking a lot about what's been happening in your city. We've talked a lot about Ilhan Omar and the election. And I was looking at some numbers the other day, and since 2012, almost 90% of the House has been reelected. Almost 85% of the Senate has been reelected since 2012. Yet and still, since Sandy Hook, we've had numerous mass shootings. As a matter of fact, we've had 18 since Uvalde, which was less than a month ago. So, uh, Mr. Scott, this idea that, you know, these people can't come to an agreement seems to be a lot of bullshit to me because these are the same people that are coming back over and over and over again. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I want to just, I want to vet your statistics. I mean, is your statistics, you're talking specifically in Minnesota, or
You
are you talking nation?
No, no. I can back up my statistics. You can go on Politico, politifax.com. They will show you the exact numbers on how many senators have been reelected, how many congressmen have been reelected, who raised the money, where the money came from. You can trace all of that on politifact.com.
Well, again, you're evading the question, James. You're evading. Are you talking about Minnesota specifically? Or are you talking
No, no,
about
no, no. I'm talking about Congress. I'm not talking about Minnesota. I'm talking about these senators and congressmen that have been reelected for the past decade and yet are still haven't done anything about gun control, still haven't done anything about voting laws. These are the same people that are coming back over and over, with the exception, of course, of your newly elected. Like I said, we've elected 15 new senators since 2012. We've we've elected, I think it's 68 new House of Representative members since 2012. So these are the same people that are going back in. What is the excuse that we can't get this done? It's not just
well, okay.
Minnesota. I'm talking about all over the country.
Well, that's a good. We got to get up. We got to get involved. I mean, yeah. I look at these things, CNN and all this Fox and all this other foolishness. I mean, we got a bunch of people that are past their use by dates. All these people are past their use by dates, and they need to go. And so, if we don't get involved, like today, I was just at a meeting on the north side of Minneapolis at Shiloh Church. That's where they've had all the funerals, all the Bishop Powell. And so there was a lady there that's running for Hennepin County attorney, Martha Holton Demick. And I was there at the meeting to support her because I believe this sister can come in and we can do better. I mean, this is the whole thing. We can do it. We continue to allow these same people to get in there to get these big old pensions down in Texas, can't protect their schools. One man can come in there with all these old Texas Rangers, big old tall hats and all big old stomachs, and they can't do anything about one man comes into that school and kills everybody, and they stand out there looking around. See this? We have to. If we're going to pay these people, we have to hold these people accountable, and that's really what the whole problem is right now. We're not holding people accountable. They're getting away with murder, and they have been doing it for years. And until we hold them accountable, until we get mobilized and vote people in, and they continue to try to think, oh, you can't give people water. They want to vote down there. You know, in Dr. Casey's state, oh, somebody I come bring you some water to put you in jail. I mean, all of these things are on the books, but they just don't enforce it. I mean, it's very perplexing to look at the news, to look at these things, and to say, why do we continue to have these same people that aren't doing better? We can do better, but we got to get the people in that want to.
What's your thought on that, Miss Sims?
Well, when you're a politician and you get in office, part of your strategy to stay in office is to cater to maybe the small group that helped put you in office. Your intention is your attention isn't trying to get other people to vote or whatever. You stick with your sure your sure thing. Your sure thing is the people that you got to in the first place that voted for you. And that's one way how politicians strategize to stay and continue to stay in power uh, through it all. To change that is like John Lewis said: when you see something, say something. A lot of the rest of people that are sitting back waiting for somebody else to do something or somebody else to say something um, has to realize that that isn't working. Them remain silent, like Mr. Scott's saying, isn't working. It's continuing to put power into the other folks' hands that are doing them in and doing them damage regarding to just standing there and being elected over and over and over again. And one of the things that I tell people that even though John Lewis says, when you see something, say something, he did not say that when you say something, expect for people to come at you and be prepared for that. To come back at you, your adversaries, etc., etc. Now his actions show that because he spoke, he said something all the time, and his actions showed that he was ready and prepared to confront whatever's coming his way. But it's um, it's getting down to uh, you know, si- being silent means you're really sabotaging yourself. If you need and see, as Mr. Scott says, there needs to be a change in people.
But Dr. Casey, aren't we making a statement when we keep sending these same people back? Evidently, either we don't care or we don't know no better. Aren't we
Both.
making a statement?
Both. We don't. Some people don't care. Some people don't know no better. Some people don't know how to care. They don't know what to do, and it's evident by the amount of people that don't know about the process of election, and as well as the they don't know the candidates. They don't know the positions that the candidates have, or what the title entails to even make a good judgment call about who should be in certain positions. So a lot of people are voting and put people in place based on highlight reels, based on comfort and incumbents. If somebody already been in office, a person that they're going to easily hit incumbent just because they're there. They feel like they know the job, and some people have an ideal that the system isn't broken. Well, it's technically the system isn't broken. It's doing what it was designed to do. It just wasn't designed to favor us or people that weren't the elite. And so much so to where, like, I think we was talking about it last week, where poor white people don't realize that they not no better than black people. They don't grasp it, that they are treated equally as us, but they just have white complexion and they don't get that. So all of those things kind of play in and make a difference in the big scale of things, because you got to think of who's really voting, who's really going to the polls. And a lot of older people, unfortunately, older black people don't always transcend their emotional wheelhouse and their intuitive nature into making change. A lot of them just go along to get along. So you can't get that far if you go along to get along. And again, these people have been in office for 30, 40 years in some cases, with nobody running against them. So who's going to take the position? You can't just kick them out the position. um, Even if they was to die, what's gonna happen next? And I've always said that, like, we have to put people in place to where when people begin to perish because everybody dies, not because anything bad is being wished on anybody, but everybody passes away. What happens when these people pass away? Are we really prepared to take things to the next level? Or is this just a whole bunch of cap and we just talking a lot of shit? And when the ball is in real play, nobody's hitting no home runs. Where the home runs at? So one of the things that I do personally is I try to enlist and instill ideals that are meant to be like a foundation for people to build on. So I give away ideals. I used to do it a lot more before, but so many people made so much off of the things that I was helping people to understand and share and I did it for the benefit of the greater good, because the more people that we have winning, the more people that they can help win. So, like Bill was saying, if I do something to help somebody else win, when they win, one, I'm proud of them winning, but then also I have put in the standard for what I do with Speaking Freedom is that if I help you win, you either got to give to the community or you got to be helping people win, because I'm not helping you win just for you to wallow in the win. I'm helping you to win so that you can give back, so that we can extend the playing hand that we have. Because the more people we have with good foundational information, the better world that it becomes. But living in a society where people think the game is to be sold, not to be told. When it really is, the game should be taught versus being bought, because we need to teach people how to move in these streets. We got
It's not
people
like
that's
rap. It's not like a rap.
I rhyme a lot. I do a lot of that. So, I told you that before, Mr. Scott, but the thing is that it is, we are seeing a time where a lot of people are coming from broken homes, trauma filled backgrounds, and then they're changing their life, and then they're going into situations to where their old lifestyle catches up to their new situation, and then it kind of doubles back. So, but the emphasis that we put on Black people, artists, entrepreneurs, leaders, is not the same standard that is put on white people. We do a million background checks on somebody that's Black before they're allowed to be a leader. But we put white people in the position like, okay, you white, you got to know it's right. You gonna do what's right because you're white, and that's not the case. And that's where we've been hoodwinked, thinking that Black people aren't smart enough to lead, that Black people don't have enough charisma or enough, the ability or the capability to even learn enough to lead. Because a lot of people question Black people. You could be as smart as Mr. Carroll. He's a very intelligent, studious person. You could tell he read a lot of books, and take in a lot of information, because his words are based on knowledge. It's not based on, oh, I thought this or somebody told me this. It's like, no, and I'm gonna tell you how I know this. And then that it don't he don't be trying to talk because he's talking a long time, but he got to explain how he know what he know, because if somebody's gonna question if he really know what he know. And that's not because he's not intelligent. It's because the color of his skin, and they're going to question the fact: does he really know what he's talking about? All
Well,
that
but
plays a
Dr.
part into
Casey,
how
I mean, I
the
think
same
what
people
you're
get in
doing is,
office.
I think, Dr. Casey, you're kind of letting parents off the hook with this. I mean, I think you're kind of letting the parents off. I mean, it really starts in the home. I mean, it really starts in what goes on in your house. It really
But how
starts
am I
there.
letting the parents off the hook?
If you can't figure out the order, if you can't, then you're not in charge, and maybe you should be gone then, because you should be able to have order in your own home. I mean, these kids under my
But
purveyance, they're
who
gonna
would
get their
say
butts up and
they
they're gonna go to
consider
school
order?
every day, right?
The the
But
span
what we're
the
seeing is this
understanding,
disorder.
Mr. Scott, no, because you can't determine what's order in somebody else's household. What's chaos to you might be peaceful to somebody else. It might be
I
the
understand
order that
that.
they need to function. So you can't say, well, they need
It's
order.
not.
You
It's
can't
not
blame
one
parents
size
because
fits all. It's not
listen,
one
listen,
size fits
Mr.
all.
Scott,
But
Mr. Scott, it's a lot of people. It's a whole lot of good ass parents that raise children very fucking well, and them children go out and do some shit, and then they be in jail, and it makes the parents look like they ain't did what they were supposed to do, and it has nothing to do
and
with
I'm
the parenting.
and I'm with
But
you
but
on that. But once they've
but
done
Mr.
their
Scott,
job, that's all they can do. They can't do
but
no more than that.
but hold
They
on,
can't
Mr.
do no
Scott.
more than that.
Mr.
I'm holding
Scott,
on.
you said that you weren't comfortable uh, with making certain uh, suggestions to your own children about raising or parenting their kids. So if
Oh,
you are,
because they're grown. They're grown now. Okay, they're grown now. I did what I could. When I'm gonna tell you something. When I did
Parenting
child
don't stop
protection,
just because they
I'm gonna
reach
tell
a
you
certain age. Parenting is until
just
you die.
one quick thing. And I worked with all these grandparents. I worked with all these grandparents that take care of these kids. Oh God, the kids are on drugs. And I talked to the grandpa. I said, "How can you do this? Can't you help your daughter?" He said, "No, I'm gonna help these little ones because they can't help themselves. The grown ones, they're grown. I can't do no more for them. They're grown." And I mean,
I think that
I
that's
think
poor
that's
parenting
reality. Reality.
because
Brother
parenting
Williams,
doesn't end. When my children get a certain age, I don't care if I am 65 and my children is them 45. If you're doing some fucked up, I mean, if you're doing some things that is out of line, I am going to correct you at any given age. My job as a parent does not end. When they get
Okay.
18, it's not time for them to move out. My kids is not getting put out when they get 18. They're going to stay their ass in this
What
house
they
until they
ever
get their
asked
head
for, they
straight
got it.
and can handle it.
What they
uh,
need, they got it. They know they. I mean, I can't order their step. You're grown. I mean, that's
You can
uh,
guide them no
bro-
matter how old they are. They always need advice. They always need that shoulder. It's never a time where a child don't need
yes.
their parent.
yeah, I used to call my
I
dad
agree.
every Sunday up until the time he passed away, if it was no more than just to say hi, Dad. But once again, that comes to a relationship between the man I called my father and the man that I called my dad. Brother Williams and Brother Kodak, I see both of you are here this evening. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are the people?
Doing pretty well, man. All power to the people.
Uh, Brother Williams, I started my first discussion off about all birth fathers aren't dads, and I said this to relay the importance of that. There's more to being a father than just donating sperm or buying the back to school clothes or just fulfilling even just fulfilling that financial obligation. I think knowing from my personal experience, I had a father and I had a dad. Now my dad had much more influence on me because I could talk to him. There was a different type of relationship and there was a certain amount of camaraderie there where with my father it was do as I say, not as I do. What do you think about the relationships when it comes between being a father and actually fulfilling the obligations of being a dad?
Well, to me, when we talk about it from that angle, it can get very complex within the black community, just based upon one of the other things that I think you got on the table to talk about when we get into the idea of post traumatic slave syndrome, and when we get into the idea and the absolutes of how the black family has been broken up intentionally to this to to tear us apart, going back from slavery. And so when you have a household, an environment that is a designed to rip apart a household, then now we're navigating as a family what defines purposeful structure for us as black people. This causes us oftentimes to be in situations to where economically, depending upon the government, it is more better off for the, so to speak, for the father to not be in the house so that the mother can collect welfare, and then the father, deals with the children outside of that situation. We're encouraged as black people to not have normal, what should be normal functioning families. So to me, when I look at that, and then I look at my own upbringing to where I had a father and a stepfather, um, the dynamic subtle confrontations that even go on from that standpoint, because now my stepfather is dealing with a situation where he's marrying a woman who's going to forever be attached to to this guy, to this other man. And here I am raising that other man's child because he lives in his household, but at the same time have to recognize and respect the fact that that father may have a different set of values than I have, and dealing with those dynamics. And so what I experienced and what I dealt with had a lot to do with some of the confrontations that will happen when you have two male figures that are both trying to pursue and be involved in child rearing. One having trying to do their best to have an influence when they only see a person roughly 2 days a week, whereas the other one has that day-to-day influence. And how does that operate and make the child feel? Because at that, when you're dealing with a dysfunctional household based upon those kind of conditions, as the child, you find yourself stuck in a situation to where you're trying to do the best that you can for both who may not necessarily share the same values. And now when we look at black people in general coming up out of the conditions of trauma that we deal with, well, what does Father's Day mean? Who do you give the credit to? Because, for instance, I saw a post that said, from a black person that said, "Happy Father's Day and stepfathers." And I felt like when I saw that, it kind of offended me because in my mind, you should not distinguish between fathers and stepfathers. The idea here is how who do you identify with that raised you in terms of that male figure and done the most for you, done the most for you, not draw a distinction between father and stepfather. So I kind of felt like sounds like they don't get it when you come with that angle, because it's one and the same to me. And so I think when we talk about how we step into the role of fatherhood, we have to look at the conditions that we've been pinned against. Like I say every week when I talk about us being at war, and recognizing that we are at war, and recognizing that we're dealing with a system that intends to keep us divided within the household, which divides us in terms of our individual identity, which divides us in terms of how we recognize a black community. All these things play right into why the black community does not circulate the dollar within this community. Because if we can't even decide on what a father is, then how in the hell are we supposed to decide on what a black community is? If my internal household is divided, how do I supposed to pull a whole community together?
Ah,
That's all I want to say
interesting,
on that. Opening up.
interesting points there, brother Kodak.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by asking Brother James, in terms of when we're saying how fathers forgotten how to be dads, if you were to place a timeline on when we've seen this change within the Black community, where we saying, quote unquote, fathers have forgotten how to be dads, what would you say that time frame took effect? For example, are we talking about during the 90s,
19,
we saw a straight
1978.
1978. So we have to look at what was
I
going
can be
around.
very, I can be very specific.
Right.
1978.
So 1978. And so my personal opinion in terms of if a father, have we forgotten how to be dads? I would say sometimes it's hard to forget something that maybe you were never taught. So for example, for myself, my father has been incarcerated since I was 7 years old. So in terms of being, and I have two boys. I'm a father of two. I have two sons, and from my standpoint, I'm an outstanding father. However, I was not taught how to be a father per se by another dad. I did have a stepfather who came into the picture. However, that individual as well ended up being incarcerated, part time in the home, outside the home. I grew up in a typical black environment where you grew up around. I'm from Southeast San Diego, so I grew up around gangs. I grew up around violence. I grew up around. This is cool to have that macho ness to you. It was not the actual standard of what we would say out of um, quote unquote standard literature of what the personification of what a father actually is, right? And so to say that we have forgotten something, we first have to understand were we ever taught to be a father. And so I'll also go into kind of piggyback on what Dr. Casey was stating. Um, there are times where yeah, the child might have been raised to do the right things. And once they go out to this world, they were influenced by their environment to do the wrong things. It's very, very something we have to pay attention to is that our peers are very influential. As you grow up, your peers are who you look towards to give that satisfaction to, right? I understand, very, very young age, I watch my children and they look up to me as their father regardless of if they understand if I'm doing a quote unquote good job or not, regardless if they understand what my financial standing is, regardless if they understand anything about me, they don't know. All they know is that man right there is the leader of my household, and that's the man I want to be like. And I'm talking about I've observed it to the extent of I work out. And so my children don't even see me work out. However, they have acknowledged that I have muscles. And so I watch both of my boys attempt to do push ups, attempt to show me their muscles. Why? I didn't tell them to do that. What they saw was that is my leader. I want to be like my leader. So naturally, yes, if there's a father within the household, the child will follow that man. However, as we go out into the world and we start to be influenced by others, whether it's other children, other teenagers, and we start to come against things that our father may not be there for. So, for example, elementary school, if you're going through elementary school, your parent is not there with you. You have your peers. And as you go through elementary school and you start to go through these trials and tribulations, whether it's I feel like I'm not doing well in school and everybody's talking about it, your father is not there to protect you. But you still have to maintain, like, we all have feelings, right? As human beings, we all have feelings. And so you don't want to be picked on. You don't want to be the guy that everybody's laughing at and frowned upon. So instead, you try to adhere to what your peers expect or see as being a man or being cool or being whatever the popular person is doing. And in turn, you forget, you kind of get sidetracked on what the goal, the mission was. The mission was to get there and be educated. You get sidetracked because you're trying to fit in. We have to understand that we have it's a society. We live in a society, so that means we're going to socialize with everyone. And our peers are huge influencers. Now, I will say this. If there's a father within the home, the father should acknowledge that because they've been there. They should acknowledge it and address it and say, hey, this is going to come. When it comes, this is how you should react. And sometimes our children listen, sometimes they don't. However, we do still have to be there for when they listen to congratulate them and when they don't listen to correct them. And furthermore, to go ahead and piggyback a little bit more on what Dr. Casey is saying, fatherhood does not stop when that child is 18. There are so many things that I've experienced. I'm 33 years old. There's so many things that I've experienced in terms of owning property, working, just finding jobs. How do you know how to do an interview if we decide at 18 we're done? Who is supposed to show you how to do that interview? And on top of that, to kind of continue along that path, we can't just go out and ask somebody because, let's say, for example, a professional career advisor that says, okay, my professional job is to teach you how to do an interview, how to build resumes. Yeah, that's their job. However, the experience in terms of who I am as a black man may not fit what they're telling me to do. I may have to go over and beyond, which 9 times out of 10, I will have to go over and articulate differently. I will have to carry myself differently. I will have to dress differently. I will have to do everything 10 times harder than what the standard is just because of my appearance. Period. And so, as a black man, we should be able, or as a black leader, whether you're a father in that household or just a leader within the community, you should be able to go to that child and say, hey, this is the angle we have to go from. Because what they're telling you, yeah, that's a standard, quote unquote, but that's not going to work for you because the standard is against us. Since the deck is stacked against us, we have to go over and beyond that standard. And in terms of standards, speaking of standard, I'm continuing on down that rant, down that path of what a standard is. Another thing, I don't want to blame the woman per se. However, I will say and make a point here to if our whole purpose once you get into adulthood is to basically try to impress the opposite sex, right? Or whatever your sexual preference may be, to try to impress that particular individual because that's who I want. So if that's what we're trying to do, we then have to take a step back to kind of say, hey, the whole purpose here is to impress, right? And so the whole purpose here is to impress. Whether you're trying to make money, the whole purpose for money is what? So you can get the women or the men, whatever the case may be. There is a focus here. So going back to my point, if the woman decides to lower that standard, if they accept this man, so for example, if this man is not living up to what the expectation of what a man should be, whether carrying a job, being a great example for the community. If the woman says yes, and you hear this all the time, niggas ain't shit, but yet you are still dealing with these men, right? You're still dealing with them, so you have yet to go ahead and place that standard. You keep saying niggas ain't shit, but you now have dropped your standard of what your partner is going to be. So now this guy, this nigga who ain't shit, can still get you. He doesn't even have to live up to the expectation of what a man should be because you have now lowered your standards. And so his quote unquote prey is basically coming to him. He doesn't have to work hard anymore. So why would you hunt if you don't need to hunt?
James,
Uh,
James, to expand on what Mr. Kodak is saying, he touched on what I was thinking. Two things. The way you made your statement, it's assuming that all dads make good fathers.
no, 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 no,
Well,
no,
well,
no, no,
no,
no.
I'm not.
Because
I'm not accusing you.
the first statement is all fathers are not dads. That's the first statement. All fathers are
Okay,
not dads.
right. And
And the premise is, can we get fathers back to being dads?
okay, then I'll go from that. From all fathers, all fathers aren't good fathers or good dads. Even if they do remain in the house and are go to work every day, etc., etc. And this time I'm coming from the behaviors that they exhibit, like Mr. Kodak was saying. That's one thing. And then the second thing, and I learned this from watching Parent Court, that how you become a dad may have a lot to do with if you become a father, because in looking at that show I've seen over and over that some way dads become fathers, they don't even care about it's just a sex thing, so they're going from woman to woman to woman and leaving children behind that they don't, sometimes they don't know about or sometimes they don't care about
Those
because
those
it's a
those
sex
are,
thing. It's
those
a
are fathers. I've been many of those. Those are fathers. I've been very few dads, but I've been a father many a times.
Okay. And I thanks for contributing personally, but this is something that I watched them in this particular program, and I didn't realize the multitude of people that are out there in that is just a sex thing where they do become parents or dads or father. It their behavior exhibits that they don't care. It's just a sex thing, and then I've seen the shows where these children have grown up that that the that the man didn't care about staying or being a father, etc., etc., and it has a dramatic effect on the adult children. And as we're talking, all these things are running through my mind, and everything that people that we're saying are, you know, can't be denied. From from what we're saying, it's all out there.
I need to know what happened in 1978 so I can have some
Yeah, yeah,
data.
yeah. Oh, and then I got something to say too.
Specific date.
He already told on himself. You weren't there. Maybe you didn't catch it, but he told.
April 12th, 1978. Suddenly, across the nation, we
No, can
lost
I
the rest.
just make a comment on what
Uh,
Miss LaSheila is saying when she's saying she's watching men hop from women to women and laying with other women and making creating kids? It goes back to kind of the statement I was saying. If the women were to say, no, I to get to know you first and then say, hey,
I need
obviously you have children and you're not in that household, why in the world would I lower my standard and accept you in my bed? Instead, why don't we have that standard to keep it up here to make sure that individual hold him accountable for his actions. Make sure that individual stays with either stays within a household. And I'm not saying you should stay with somebody just because of a child. I'm not saying that. However, you should still carry out your duty as a parent. You still need to carry out that duty because you still have that assignment. You still have a child. Whether you're co-parenting with somebody else, like Brother Robert Ward is saying, whether it's a stepfather and a father in the household, however, adults, you should be able to work that out and understand we both have to now raise this child. And I understand there can be conflicts of interest, just like he stated. However, as adults, you should be able to come together and come to a conclusion on what is best for that child. If you're actually being a father, you understand what is best. It might not be you, but you understand what is best for that child, and you make a decision for what is best for that child and for that child's development.
Yeah.
Dr.
So,
Casey,
so
go ahead, Bill.
I was going
so
to
no, I
say,
have something. I have something to say as soon as you get finished, Bill.
well, so getting back to, I'm sure Mr. Scott will love this. Getting back to the rap game. Now, you have essentially, right, the classic conundrum of Russell Carrington Wilson versus Future, right? Where a lot of people want to be Future, and fewer people want to be Russell Carrington Wilson, right? Despite the fact that Mr. Russell Carrington Wilson has a master's degree from Wisconsin,
I don't agree with you.
was a all conference, quarterback in two different conferences, right? They both the Atlantic Coast Conference and the Big Ten, set a bunch of records, drafted in the third round, beats out a guy who got $25 million guaranteed dollars in a quarterback battle with Matt Flynn for the Seahawks. They end up getting rid of the guy they paid $25 million to, instead going with the third round draft pick in Russell Carrington Wilson. But there are more kids who grew up wanting to be Future than Russell Carrington Wilson. So because one guy is right, one of these, right? That whole thing, right? I grew up deeply imbued in blurred culture, right? Black nerd culture. And when you read books, when you speak a certain way, when you accept responsibility, that's not always the sexiest thing to some people, particularly if you haven't been taught or raised in such a way to think that that's what you should want. So you brought up something very interesting, Kodak, when you said, why are they laying with these dudes with their pants falling up their butts and can't keep a job and in and out of jail and whatever, tats and nose rings and all sorts of cool stuff going on, right? I mean, like, I love Tupac Amaru Shakur. I think we all do. But a whole bunch of people bought into part of him and didn't buy into the rest of him, right? Because he was doing all that stuff, but he also was like reading, reading books, right? He was also, deep into trying to understand African spirituality and never really got there. Unfortunately, he died before. We'll never know what he could have been or what he should have been. But like, there was another aspect of him, right? There was a guy who was truly the duality of man, right? In so many ways. Oh my gosh. Woo. If somebody did a real book around him, what it would be like.
That's what I want to happen with a movie.
Yeah,
I wish that movie that they did, the
let's get
movie
the
that they
book
did
right
should have been
first.
better.
I saw
I don't
that
trust
movie.
I don't trust them just to make the movie. I want the book
I wasn't
first.
impressed.
Maybe it's just me because I grew up as a writer. I don't trust people just to go out and make movies. I've seen how that usually turns out. But there's this conundrum where young black men and young black women are told, here, you should want this, right? Oh, don't worry about buying a house. Get this cool ass whip, right? This thing that goes down 37.5%, 27 minutes after you drive it off the lot. 27.5 minutes if you drive it off the lot. If you turn around and try to sell it back, they're gonna, you bought it for 27, they're gonna maybe take it off your hands for 19, right? If you're lucky. And of course, I mean, Kanye West said some great things and some dumb things. And once again, more of that duality of man stuff. But if you go back to some of his early work before he lost his mind, he talks about, right, how we got out of chains, we could go out and buy chains, and there's all these great lines about about himself even, right? Talking about, a young black female addicted to retail. People are self-medicating. That's what some of this stuff is, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be a drug to be a drug, right? You can get hooked on a whole lot of things in this world, including other people, right? You can get hooked on other people. So you said, your father wasn't around, or if your father was around, he wasn't the right kind of father, or whatever it is. And you're going to look for somebody's going to fill that hole. We talked about that. Nature abhors a vacuum. If that male energy in your life either wasn't there at all or was the wrong energy, it wasn't fitting, didn't help you, didn't help to make you a better person, didn't help to tick you from this spot to where you were trying to go, somebody's going to fill that role. It might be that you suddenly are having relationships with older men, right? There's a whole bunch of ways that women fill that hole. And going in the other direction, that hole that you have in your life as a young man where you aren't learning about accepting responsibility, you're going to fill that hole with something else. Sometimes it's just more women, right? Well, I'm just throwing people, and there are people who, like I said, it's a point they brag about, right? Well, I got one over here. I got one in such and such. I played ball overseas for a while. I got one in a whole other country. Like, this is something I've heard. I mean, barbershop, I've heard dudes brag about this stuff. Like, how many of them know you, though, right? Maybe one or two of them have seen you in the last several months. Maybe, right? But some people think that's their legacy, even though these people don't even know you. They don't know you from a can of paint. That's not your legacy. So as long as there is a fracture, and that's what it's all coming back to, it's a fracture. There's a fracture in our culture. There's a fracture in our community. The reason we just say hood, because the neighbor part died years ago. What was it, 1978, James? Is that what it happened? So it went from being a neighborhood to just a hood, right? Was that the year? There's a reason we don't say neighborhood. We just say hood because the neighbor part died. How many of you, be honest with yourselves, know your neighbors, know their first names, know their last name, know what they do for a living, how many kids they have, right? There was a time when we all knew that. I knew that Mr. Waters across the street had been in the Marine Corps, that he learned to work on cars and trucks while he's in the Marine Corps. He has 2 children, Mary Elizabeth Waters and Robert Jr. Like, that I knew these kids. I knew their parents. I knew what their parents did. The Kincaids on this side, right? They were a retired couple. Kendra was their granddaughter. I used to play with her when she would come and visit them. Like, that's dead. I'll be honest. I don't know. I know to say hi and bye. I know that the man below me is a disabled Vietnam vet. I don't know his name, right? But you know what I mean? Like, it's not just, I mean, I'm talking about myself. Like, I don't have that relationship that my parents had and that I had as a kid with my neighbors. So we have, as a whole, these fractures. Our families are fractured, right? Our communities are fractured. Our culture is fractured. Our minds are fractured. So as long as these things stay fractured, because it's easy to break, it's hard to fix. It's easy to break a family. It's easy to break a mind. It's easy to break a child. It's easy to break a marriage or a relationship. It's easy to break a neighborhood. It's easy to break a community. It's easy to break a culture. It's so hard to fix. And very few people even say we want to fix it, right? Because it's so hard. People look at it and say, oh, that's too hard, right? But we can do little things. Like, I'm going to talk to my neighbors more, right? I know that there's a lady across the hall. We say hi and bye to each other. I'm going to ask her something about how her day is going next time I see her. I'm going to try a little bit, try to put a little something in that hole. But there's a lot. Like, that hole's done pretty deep now. Like, we don't have a sense of together, because even within ourselves, there's a fracture, right? Even within ourselves. So until you fix you as above, so below. You can't just pick one thing and fix it. We can't just fix the community. Well, if your family's broken, how are you gonna fix the community? If your culture's broken, how are you gonna fix the community? How are you gonna fix your family if your culture's broken? How are you gonna fix the community if your family's broken? How are you gonna fix yourself if your family's broken? How are you gonna fix your family if you're broken? So it's exhausting, but you gotta say you either spit the bit and say I'm done, or you say, as bad as it is, I'm gonna try a little bit each day to fill in that hole. Okay, I talked more than I mean to. Sorry about that. Done.
Dr. Casey.
So I have to address a few things. I want to start with the Tupac movie. So with the Tupac movie, I really wanted it. I was expecting it to be more about the things of him we don't know, because we didn't seen the videos and what happened right before. I mean, how many times is they gonna show us this? And it was so frustrating because my son was an extra in the movie. So when it was like time, I was just like kind of like, man, y'all did this again. Like, why didn't y'all expand the knowledge base of the man, not the artist? We already know what happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I was looking for more of who he was as a man behind the artistry, because the things that he talked about in his records was only possible because he was educated and he knew some shit. That's the reason why a lot of people don't talk about anything now, is they don't read books, they ain't graduated high school, they not taking in information that would translate to a better lifestyle or better living. They're just rapping basically kind of what they know. Now, when you talk about Kanye and that particular song, because he was like, yeah, and I'm still gonna do what I'm gonna do, basically at the end of the verse. Um, don't discredit people like E40, because E40 already said don't buy an $80,000 car before you buy a house. You know what I'm saying? So, and I love E40. I got my game, everything that I know, the things that I know about men, that I know about the street. Some of it was from my family, but a lot of it was from listening to E40, listening to Jay-Z, and not really just listening to the beat and rocking my head to the music, but like listening to the lyrics and playing
Yep.
it back. Like, what? Wait a minute, what did he just say? Did you like y'all not listening to this? That's why y'all not hyped, because he really just said a mouthful and y'all just listen to the beat and bobbing your head. But if you really listen to what they're saying a lot of foundational things
Yep.
without even saying what it is that they're saying. And a lot of people don't use metaphors nowadays. This is why so many niggas is in jail for things that they shouldn't be rapping about directly on
Dry
the
stitching, wet stitching, drenched stitching, all of it.
back
Yes,
snitching,
correct.
up snitching, down snitching. They got the, and matter of fact, Thug just dropped the freestyle on the phone with a guy, and he's still talking about killing people. Like, nigga, did you not learn? Did you not get the memo? Clearly, that wasn't enough, because you on the from jail freestyle still like, yeah, and I bruh, chill out. Find something else. Read a book in there and find something else to rap about. Or find a new metaphor where you don't have to say, I put a price on his head and you know what I'm saying, they ain't dead. And you heard, we heard you. Now that's why you in jail, because you talk too much. You ran your mouth one in such a way, because Jay-Z and them talked about doing all type of stuff. But you ain't know what Jay-Z and them was talking about doing unless you was, you know what I'm saying, in the streets and really kind of knew what those code words were. And there are no metaphoric artistry really going on. Everybody want to say what they're doing so they can get the clout from what they're doing, instead of letting what they're doing bring the clout to them. Now when you talk about Russell and Future, I hate this comparison with any black man, because two black men will never be the same. Russell come from a whole different characteristic background and
Oh,
all of that.
his grandfather, Harrison Baines Wilson, was the president of Norfolk State when I was a student there. I've known about Russell Wilson since he was this big, right?
So,
Because
so
there's
listen,
pictures of him in the president's office at Norfolk State. Yeah, I know how different his background is.
I know people that know Future. He's from the trap.
Oh,
He,
I
you know what I'm
know.
saying? His nickname used to be Meathead. That should say a lot. But the fact is, and this is, I talk about this on Speaking Freedom TV. He need black man, period. We always talk about black women not respecting themselves and choosing the wrong men and da 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 da. But black men don't value their penis. They don't value their semen. They don't value who they are because they will put their little thing in
Every place.
anybody, and
Yeah.
they will like kids in anybody. And then like with Future in particular, he's mad because girls are, but you're laying with them. You're not using protection, and then you're what are you doing? You're breeding this environment because you're being reckless. Now, some of his recklessness, like with most men, is from hurt. Somebody hurt him, so now they gonna try to get back, and that get back is really setting them back. But they don't really want to say that because it's supposed to be player about it. So,
And
but I don't
some of
like
them think they're going to die young anyway, so they're trying to make sure something's left behind. All kinds of.
I think that's what Nick Cannon got going on. And his structure system seems a little bit more sound, but I think that he has an illness. I think that he needs to seek professional help because you're doing it too randomly, too sporadically. Like, did he get a diagnosis to say he's going to be dying soon or something? Like, what is it that's making him have 4 women pregnant at a time every few months?
Hey,
That's
y'all giving Anthony too much ammunition over there. He having a
Look,
field
he
day.
over there jotting down notes.
He having a field day.
So,
The bottom
and
line
then
is we talking about insecurities, okay?
Really,
Insecurities
that's
and
what it really is. But then, so I'll go to here. So I met a guy at Rick Ross Car Show. Shout out to that. That was a really cool event. And I met a guy who seemed cool. He seemed cool until he got my number and he came off aggressive. And then as soon as I start saying, well, I'm not going here, I won't meet you there. I have standards. I'm not driving nowhere out of, what I'm saying, too far out of my comfort zone because I don't know you. And literally he started fussing at me. And I'm like, bruh, if you are fussing, what the hell am I gonna do? If you doing the fussing, what do I got? I don't want to be with a man that's fussy. Yesterday he texted me and he got mad. I had already told him, like, bruh, you really aggressive. I'm a real Zen type of person, like if you ain't bringing a Zen, then you got to go. Like, I don't really want to talk to you like that. So, but he was still fussing the entire time. Yesterday, after he told me, well, forget you then, his response was, you got too many restrictions. You got too many, like, you mean I got too many standards and boundaries, and I'm not gonna let you just treat me, talk to me like I mess with classy women. They must not be that classy because you way too aggressive, bruh. And so yesterday he texted me like, I can't believe you didn't wish me a happy Father's Day. Bruh, first off, you just told me that you weren't gonna talk to me no more. Secondly, I already told you I'm not interested. So why would I? But I'm not obligated. I've talked to you maybe a couple times on the phone. I've met you one time. What makes you think that I am obligated? But you know what? One of the things that he said to me, you're the reason why black men go to other races. Well, nigga, we don't want you anyways, because if you feel like that, it's already a problem. Because all I said is you're not going to talk to me crazy. I don't feel like fussing with you. And when you start fussing, I'm going to hang up because I'm not arguing with nobody I'm not having sex with. You're not checking me about nothing that I should be only checked about somebody if I'm having sex with them or we're in a relationship. Like, you can't ask me what I'm doing, you can't do, and you can't get mad because I didn't wish your Father's Day. I don't even know you have children. We ain't talk that much. You know what I'm saying? Like, but if you try to set standards, then you're ridiculed. You're taught, you're almost bullied, and people try to manipulate you. Even when I tell people that I've been celibate for 7 years, it's like, oh, what's wrong? Ain't nothing wrong. One off, I am an ordained minister, so being celibate is not really outside of the box of the realm of what I'm doing. But I'm also a sex coach. But being celibate doesn't make me less of a sex coach. It just means that I value what I have, and I'm not gonna let it go easy. And a lot of people aren't used to that because women are, I don't want to say desperate, but they're looking for love. They're trying to fill voids. And instead of working on themselves and understanding what they really want, what they really need, versus like, because I'm sure another woman will be like, ooh, he said that he would do this, or if I go here and I don't care about that. Another guy, ooh, let me fly you out. I don't want to get flown out because what do you want
Okay.
once I
Okay.
get
Now,
out?
Dr. Casey, you're in Atlanta, right?
Hmm.
You're in Atlanta. So you're telling me that these brothers ain't got no game down there? I mean, if they don't know how
It's
to,
no,
they
no,
don't
and
know
I
how to
won't
talk
say
to
that.
so in other words, they don't have no game. See,
we're,
Some
we're,
see,
we're,
men
I
are
need to come
Mr.
down
aggressive.
there.
Scott,
You need to
Mr.
come
Scott,
down there and spread the word.
we're not talking about game, and I know you
All
got,
right,
I know the
I
wine bottle is full and
I
all that,
understand.
you know,
I mean,
but
some people see
but
it's the rap
but
game, and
right,
I
but
understand that. But
well, so I'm gonna let you bring this next question, Mr. Scott. Post traumatic slave syndrome. Is this a matter of classical conditioning? Are we like Pavlov's dogs?
yeah, it is post-traumatic slave syndrome. I mean, it's this stuff has never went away. It's the elephant in every room. It's the elephant. They continue to not treat us the way we're supposed to be treated. All the laws. I mean, and they said it right away. All men are created equal. Really? Oh, but we didn't mean you. Wait a minute. Wait. You're 3/5. What? And see, this is what we continue to have to deal with. They get in fast motion, like up here in Minneapolis with the George Floyd, which I'm a mile away from there. I mean, I've had helicopters over my house. I've had police all over the place. The street is still all messed up. It's all because they just can't. Why would you to watch that George Floyd thing? I tell you, I happened to be on Facebook and watched it live. And I mean, I could not believe, to this day, I cannot believe what I was seeing. How cavalierly this man killed this man on the ground. Didn't care and got up like he was some kind of sheriff and just holding his gun. And you see, until we address these things, it's always going to be the elephant in the room. The
Ain't getting addressed. They
responsibility.
just ain't doing nothing about it. To keep address, it's like wasting your
Yeah,
breath. If you keep talking about something and keep talking about something,
that's what
eventually,
they do.
I mean, like they've been marching, they've been fighting the exact
The
matter of fact.
same
Tupac said
thing.
he didn't want to be 50 years old. So this past year, if Tupac was still alive, he would have predicted exactly what he said. He didn't want to be 50 years old at a BT award show talking about the same thing that he was
Uh,
talking about before
look,
he passed away, and we
look
are
here,
still
Doctor
trying to
Casey.
get. We shall
Look,
overcome. We
look
didn't
here.
beyond
Look here,
that. We got to do something different.
Doctor Casey. My grandmother was from Talladega, Alabama, right, Birmingham, Talladega. We're sitting on TV. I'm like 7 or 8 years old, watching what's going on in Birmingham, putting dogs, hoses, right where she lived, right in the area that she was. She said, "Well, you know what? I hope you don't have to see this with your kids. I don't help, and I have to see the same damn thing with Rodney King, the same damn thing with George Floyd. It just continues." Yeah, my grandma, she said, "I hope you never see this." And she lived through all of that stuff down there. All that stuff down in Birmingham. Couldn't go to school, no schools, going to churches with a dirt floor. That's what you would tell. Our little church had a little dirt floor. I'm like, oh my God. I asked my grandfather, why did the blues people, I asked him, why did the blues sing always play acoustic guitar? He said, we didn't have no electricity down south. We didn't have no bathroom. We had an outhouse. We had a well to get water from. It just really kicked in what they had to go through for us to get to where we're at. So
Uh, Brother Williams, have we been classically conditioned?
Definitely.
To, go
Let me
ahead.
speak. Let me speak a little bit on it, just even from the perspective of what Mr. Scott was talking about when he was talking about watching or seeing what went on with George Floyd. Well, let's just look at the conditioning aspect of that, the slave conditioning part. The slave conditioning part is that we do not see our strength. From there, what we did is stand back and yell, "Get off of him," instead of actually intervening and jumping in and stopping the situation. We have been conditioned to be afraid to step up and stand up as African people. We have been conditioned to not want to fight back, not want to protect ourselves, and not want to have a defense structure or a progressive structure as it applies to self-defense. And so what we'll do is we'll film it, we'll yell, but we gonna damn sure keep our distance and let somebody's life be lost. That is a slave conditioning, is what that is. And then when you talk about the idea, and it's going back to the terminology and coining the word of trauma in there. Trauma deals with the fact that it stunts growth. Trauma stunts growth is what it does. And so when you take a situation of a conditioning of people being basically domesticated, and then you talk about the trauma that goes into that, again, it stunts our growth in terms of who we are as African people, which causes us to go right back to the same thing that we talked about earlier with the fatherhood. These are the things that impede our ability to what? Have an intact family, an intact mentality, an intact personal life, which goes into having the ability to have an intact community. So these things are the conditioning. So when you talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome, and the disorder behind that, now the whole post part is to me a play on words, because what we're dealing with is we're dealing with the aspect of the physical slavery may be post, but the psychological, the mental slavery, and the spiritual slavery is still going on. And that, I think, is what a lot of people don't recognize. And so in essence, we may be physically free to a certain degree, but we're still not mentally free, and we're still not spiritually free. We still hold on to the spirituality of our oppressor. We still hold on to the cultural values of our oppressor. We still hold on to the status of our oppressor, which causes us as African, especially male Africans, to have an inferiority complex, which goes right into the whole aspect of why we have to feel like we need to sleep with the most amount of women. These things raise our self value. And when it raises your self value, what is it doing in terms of the destruction to the community, the destruction to the black family? So yes, we have definitely been conditioned, and to a great degree, we are not recognizing how that trauma stunts our growth and our return to being a holistic being.
But Kodak,
Yeah, I completely agree with Brother Robert Ward here. And I would say one of the most significant ways of conditioning our behaviors and getting us to feel inferior is fear. So, for example, if you look at all of our leaders who have actually stepped up to try to make a difference, what happens? Assassinated somehow, one way or another, they are killed. That is done on purpose. That is done on purpose because it's letting us all know, hey, if you step out of line and you think you're going to make a change, we will kill you. And so a lot of times that fear of death is what holds a lot of people back. My personal view is death is easy, right? Because death, if you are killed or if you die, it's over for you. Everyone else who is left behind get to still have that feeling of fear. That's what that fear is. That's how it's created. The person who's dead is not afraid. They're dead. They're not afraid. They don't feel anything. However, the community who saw this happen, psychologically, we just make up stuff. Oh, that had to feel bad, or you know what I mean. We automatically go to this place in our mind that tells us it hurt, or it was bad, or I don't want that to happen to me. And I get it, the whole idea of being a human being. We all want to live. That's the whole purpose of being a human being. However, to me, being in prison for a lifetime sentence is worse than being in a cage and living in a cage and not being able to see your family is worse than death. That is something you feel every day. Death is over quick. So I feel like we shouldn't be afraid, although that is something that is basically formulated into our society and into our communities to be afraid of it so we don't take action because, wait a minute, I don't want that to happen to me. For example, George Michael Floyd situation. When Mr. Anthony is saying nobody stepped up. Why? Fear. They did not want anything to happen to them. If I step in, if I intervene, although I am right, if I intervene, they may do something to me. They may take the little that I have. We have this fear. Fear is crazy because, for example, how significant, how effective fear is. Raise your hand if you ever been to hell. Nobody's been there. So how are we
At, at,
afraid?
at least twice.
In 1978, huh? How
Because
are we afraid of this place? How are we afraid to go somewhere that nobody has actually been and come from to tell the story of what it's like? We have allowed whoever to put out there, hey, be afraid of this imaginary land that nobody has been to and come back from to tell you about. How? That is crazy. That's one of the craziest things. Fear, I'll show you another example of fear. At night when you're driving alone, you could be on the road by yourself, red light in front of you. You clearly see no one is around you. Will you run that red light? No. You have been conditioned that there will be a consequence if you attempt to run that red light. The fear aspect comes alive and says, wait a minute, if I try to run this red light, something bad will happen to me. That's how it's at a lower level, that's how effective fear is. Fear is what drives literally control. That's how you control people's fear. If you can get these people to be afraid of something they should not be afraid of, you have won the battle. The battle hasn't even started, and you have won because they're afraid of it. That to me is one of the biggest aspects of control, and one of the things we have to get over. We can't be afraid. If you're afraid to stand up, or you expect the next man to stand up for you because you're afraid, that's how we get our leadership chopped down. Reality is, once one leader chops, it should be like the mythical creature that grows heads every time one is chopped down. Another one should grow. Another one should grow. It should multiply by 3, 4, 5 times. We should not be marching. I agree. We should not be singing. We should not be asking. We've been asking for how long? We're not getting. They'll give us crumbs to keep us. Oh yeah, here they go. Here go the blacks marching again. Let's give them some crumbs to get them to be quiet. They're gonna tear some stuff up. Guess what? We got insurance for that stuff. We know they're gonna riot. We have insurance. We get our money back. We don't care. However, we will label you as being violent. We'll just play on what we already see you as, and we'll tell society, look, we told you. That's how they act. However, that fear aspect still comes into play because guess what? Instead of stepping up and being a leader, even, and I'm kind of jumping around, even when it comes to being that father, when we're talking about being a father, and that fear of failure sometimes jumps, or that fear of judgment, that is actually probably a more precise analysis is judgment. Everybody is afraid of being judged, and we're only judging each other. We're in our own communities judging each other and judging how we respond to different things, causing more further making this situation worse than it should be. Instead of saying, hey man, you know what, we can get this working together and promoting each other. Even going back to I think Dr. Casey was saying it about how women will judge each other and say, well, look, that man got this and this, you're not gonna take that girl. Well, it's the same thing. Fear of judgment. Fear conquers a whole lot. It's very easy to take over a people, to get into their mind. They're afraid of you. And the reality is, for us to be as gifted we are as black people, why are we afraid? There's nothing to be afraid of. We're stronger. We've proved that. Smarter. We've proven that. All these things that we've already proven throughout history, but yet somehow we're afraid of what they're telling us. How? It doesn't make sense to me, and it's something
James,
that we need to
I'm gonna have to go.
well, let me get your final thoughts before you go, Mr. Scott.
I'm gonna have to go, and I just had an open-ended question for all the guests. Do who eats chitlins and pig feet? I didn't
Uh,
see no hand. I, Brother Ward's head came up, so I don't know if that was a affirmative or Brother
No,
Ward's
that
head
that's
came up.
that's slave food, brother. I do not eat slave food. I have options now. I have a choice.
okay. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I didn't get any more answers, so I'm just that's going to be my final thing. With one of my dad's sayings, if the dog hadn't stopped the doo doo, he'd have caught the rabbit.
Mr. Scott,
Uh,
I don't eat them because I don't care for the taste. I've tasted them in the past, but they don't taste good. So, like freedom of choice. It's not a slave thing or whatever. It's just they don't taste good. In fact, they
uh,
have no taste to me.
But I digress. Kind of just close it out, going back to the Willie Lynch syndrome, post-traumatic slave syndrome.
well,
The
I'm
fe-
gonna I'm gonna give everybody a chance to get their final thoughts in. Miss
Go
Sims,
ahead.
why don't you give us your final thoughts?
While listening to Kodak regarding fear and death, I'm a little. I take a difference on that. Um, and to me, fear and conditioning are two different things. As he was speaking, it seemed like he was kind of saying, using that as the same here and there. But as a senior citizen, I look at death differently because I know everybody dies. It's a cycle of life, but I'm 72, 3 years old now, and for the last 7 months, I've been the sickest I've ever been in my life in terms of hospitalization and aftercare and things like that. So, in terms of the cycle of life, I would say, in a natural sense, I am on my cycle of life journey. I am closer to death than he is, and everybody except James. He might be the same boat as me. And so I have thought about it, and it's up on me. And I have a fear in the sense of that I don't want to go because I think of who I'm leaving behind and what I'm leaving behind. And although I've known everybody dies at some time, in some way or the other. And so mentally, I knew that as you age, the body's going to do what it's supposed to in regards to aging and not be as physical as you were, etc., etc. What's throwing me off and I'm not aging well and being a senior citizen well. What's throwing me off is the unexpected things that are coming in from the side, like being ill, getting infections, and being in the hospital, and that's really throwing me off, and not having enough energy and whatever. This it just getting to me, and then and being sick and having people come to the home uh, for home care. One of the things that they're asking you to do is to sign, fill out, is that contingency of care in regards to, if you're incapacitated and who's going to make your decisions and things like that. And so the social worker mentioned that the next time she would be bringing that. So she left a copy here with me. And I opened the copy and I looked at all these things. And I went into kind of a state of depression or whatever. But I couldn't understand why, because all the things that was in this book they were asking me about and that I need to prepare for, I had already thought about it. But here it was in front of me, and it's a reality. I needed to sign off and who's going to be responsible and things like that. And so the things that I knew were coming was here and now. I couldn't avoid it anymore, and so I had to deal with it. And but the next time when she came and we were to discuss it, I had an emotional meltdown. I started crying. I literally could not talk for a while. And so she said, "Okay, let's put this away and just talk." And as we talked, I came out of my meltdown, and we shared some things regarding what I was feeling, how she was felt, some personal things with her and her children, etc., etc. And so, to me, that was the reality, and I didn't know why I had the meltdown, but it was because the I was close to and knew that in terms of my cycle of life, was closer than it had ever been. I had to face it and couldn't avoid it. So my fear of death comes from thinking about who and what I'm going leave behind like my family and things like that, and I haven't done everything I wanted to do. So that's how I think it in terms of fear versus where Mr. Coda was. It sounds like he's thought about it, and he has certain aspects, and I believe where he's coming from. And even when first met Mr. Williams in terms of a while back, and I came on the panel, and hearing that he was a part of the Panther movement, and I remember what the Panther stood for way back when I was growing up, and how they were eliminated and stuff. So I knew, and I listened to him, that for him to become a Panther, he had to be ready to do various things, and one of them was for looking out for himself and other people he cared about, and being willing to die for it. And so I thought about that, and I said, well, he's such a young man and whatever, but I respected where he was coming from, and I respected for where you're coming from, Kodak, in regards to things and decisions we have personally made of how we're going to behave and act individually. And it's a fact. You guys are fascinating to me. I think about you through the weeks, and I really respect and honor you all. And I wonder if you all know how much of our influencers that you all are. They
Miss, Miss Sims, can I want to give you a piece of advice. Don't be so afraid to die that you're scared to live.
right, right.
Okay.
That's what the meltdown was. But I got over it. The next week I went on. You're right. I still, because I don't know the exact time and date, so I better get going.
Yeah.
I gotta speed up.
Pretend like every day that you wake up, pretend like there's not going to be a tomorrow.
That's
Live the
right.
best you can today.
That's right.
Uh, but that's just my
And you're
philosophy
right.
on that. Bill, your final thoughts.
Yeah. So my final thoughts go to my father, and this is the 12th Father's Day that I have celebrated since he went to go sing with the choir invisible, as people used to say. Um, at least in part because he and I are alike in so many ways, it sometimes feels like I will literally open my mouth and hear his voice. And both literally and figuratively, we sound very similar. And I remember realizing how similar we sound. My voice must have changed when I was in 7th grade, because I remember one time the chair of the English department, where my father was a professor, called and launched into a whole discussion after I answered the phone, and just told me about a bunch of different things, assuming that I was my father. And I had to finally say, no, sorry, no, this is Little Bill. This is Billy. And she's like, oh, your voice has changed. So that's when I realized my voice must have changed, because she thought I was him. People have been using my father so it was a measuring stick for me since as long as I can remember. And that can be a burden, obviously, in some ways. But for me, it was an honor, because he was a great man. As James and I were talking before everyone else joined us, my father was born in Brooklyn, New York, to a young woman who unfortunately had both physical and mental illnesses and died fairly young. He was raised by his grandparents, Sarah and Thomas Carroll. And as I mentioned, once again, before everyone else joined, Thomas Carroll never spent a single day, not one, inside of a schoolhouse. He had literally zero education, none. And his wife, Sarah, could read the Bible and had probably about 3 or so years of primary education. She could do basic math and, like I said, read probably to about a 3rd or 4th grade level. And they worked. I mean, my ability to comprehend how hard they worked, I cannot begin to understand. Because in addition to working on that farm that they originally started as tenant farmers and sharecropping, she also baked and sold baked goods. She took in washing. He was a roofer of some renown, to the point that people still will point to houses that he put roofs on, in some cases, I guess, literally over 100 years ago, and say that's a Thomas Carroll roof. So if you go to certain parts of Surrey County, people will still point, and sometimes it's the only thing left, right? The farmhouse is gone. It's just the roof sitting in the middle of a cornfield or whatever. That's Thomas Carroll roof. So they managed by the time he died. And so she lived on that farm for probably about another 16, 17 years after his passing. But they owned 112 acres of land by the time he died. And I think about what it took for them to do that. All right. I mean, I'm a reasonably accomplished person, but I don't think I could do what they did when I think about the obstacles they faced at the time that they were facing them to do what they did, right? And so my father is raised by these people who essentially pulled what, if you think about the circumstances, is a, I don't even know, maybe minor miracle is underselling it. Maybe medium miracle might be a better way to describe it. Because every chance someone got, they got cheated, right? I mean, think about the fact that every time you're selling something, every time you're buying something, every time, because they know, it's not like they know that you haven't had the education because they denied it to you, right? Every child prior to my father's generation was born at home. Many of them died at home during childbirth, right? Sarah outlived many of her children, 8 of whom didn't even make it to their first year of life, right? My father's, she had 22 total pregnancies, 14 of whom at least lived to adulthood, which in those days was actually a pretty good ratio, I guess. Every time I think about, that's when it makes me not feel like I should ever complain about anything, right? When I think about their lives and my father's upbringing, right? And how he and his cousin Harold could only go to church in alternate weeks because the boys who wore shoes that size could only wear the good pair of shoes in alternating weeks, right? I can't even begin to imagine what it was like. I used to get mad when I didn't get I didn't get a bike, like I look back at what a little piece of fresh piece of humanity I was. And it makes me so look back and think, man, So as now a father, right? And I still talk to my father. I mean, even though because I feel like we're still connected, right? I still hear him in my head and literally hear him when I speak because of how similar we sound. I think constantly about what that actual, your legacy, your legacy really is, what heritage really is, because it's not just genetics. And genetics is a part of it, obviously. But if all you're doing is spreading your seed, sowing your seed, we talked about it earlier, then you're literally that's not farming, right? If you just throw seed in the air, you're not a farmer. You're just wasting seed, right? Cultivation is farming. Cultivation is fatherhood, right? Are you cultivating the seed? Because throwing seed into the air, spreading the seed isn't farming. That's not farming, because you're not raising, you're not collecting, you're not raising, you're not collecting, you're not watering, you're not fertilizing, you're doing nothing but throwing the seed. That's all you did. So it's been a part of my life since as long as I remember that you have a responsibility. One, to carry this name, literally, the first and last name, different middle names. But my father didn't have middle names. I used to joke we were too poor. We couldn't afford them. But I have a middle name. My father didn't. But at first it was, like I said, kind of a burden. And then as I've gotten older and matured, I've realized it's an honor. And, obviously I have a daughter, and she's not going to, carry my name. Well, depending on what she decides with her last name, I guess she could carry the last name. But she does carry not only the genetics, but she carries the understanding that we got here through people who literally broke their backs, right? I mean, not even metaphorically, literally broke their backs. I remember watching my great-grandmother, who lived till I was about 2.5 years old, the way she moved. And you could tell that was, she worked from the time she was probably at 3 or 4 years old until she died at 94. We think, once again, as I mentioned before, since she was born at home to people who were illiterate, it's all kind of guesswork. We think, based on what people said was going on around the time she was born, we think she was about 94 when she passed. Nobody knows. I mean, and even less is known about Thomas's situation because, once again, I mean, he was born apparently shortly after the end of slavery. We think because, once again, nobody could write or read, born at home. But it is clear to me that this is not an accident. We're here for a reason, and we have to pick up the burden and carry it. And our burden is so much lighter than theirs. So that's my final thought. That the burden I carry is so much lighter, and the one that my daughter carries will be even lighter. But we also aren't as strong in some ways. So even though the burden is lighter, we don't carry it as well sometimes. But yeah, I'm going to try to get my weight up, as they say.
Brother Williams, we'll let you, and then Brother Kodak, we'll let you take us home.
All right. Well, what I want to just kind of speak on is the fact that we're looking at Father's Day and Juneteenth being on the same day.
Yep.
And I want to reflect on the fact that basically, and me coming from Dallas, Texas, or Texas, should I say, as it has to do with Juneteenth, the way I grew up looking at Juneteenth, I grew up with Juneteenth, seeing Juneteenth as not necessarily something to celebrate because to me it was about why am I celebrating the fact that I am the last to find out? And then when you look at the order itself of what was relayed, it basically said that the relationship between slave and master is now employer and employee, and that the slaves were basically the quote unquote freedmen, as they say, were told to stay put, stay in your place, and accept wages. And now, when you talk about what those wages are, now you talk about a condition that basically uh, cause them to basically stay in the same uh, bondage that they were in before. Because again, going back to the whole post-traumatic slave syndrome, we're dealing with the fact that people are all of a sudden are released from physical bondage, but never taken through a process of repair to be what you was prior to that bondage situation. And then once you were released, the whole process of okay, you're a human now, but we're going to litigate your humanity to something of an inferiority capacity. So we're dealing with an entire empire, entire institution that is built around keeping us down, keeping us oppressed, keeping us suppressed in terms of the power that we should have. And then moving into modern times, and I emphasize this oftentimes on the show, is that having a black identity makes you an extremist. So being an extremist now is, putting you in a category to where when you attempt to be proud of your heritage or attempt to define your heritage, and with the Panther Party we say define, develop, and defend, getting in a position where you're establishing and working within those 3Ds, now all of a sudden you're a threat to a society. Going back to what Miss Sims was saying, she admired about the Panthers. One of the things I do like to draw correction on has to do with the fact that I tell people that within the Panther Party, we emphasize the fact that uh, it's actually to have a revolutionary act of death is not the same as living for the people. So the greatest thing that we can do as Panthers is live for the people. But we draw a distinction between living for the people and surviving because our black people are in a state of survival mode. Being in a state of survival mode means within our mechanism structure, you're doing two things. You're learning how you're adapting and learning how to cope, and then you're in denial. That is survival. Whereas living is being in a position of empowering your people and
Right, right.
empowering your status. So that is what's hard to do. But
Mhm.
we have been conditioned to survive and die. And kind of going back to that whole thing about chitlins, chitlins is a slave food. It is based upon being in a condition to where all you have made available to you is the intestines of something. And I would even go as far as basically saying the lower intestines. So you're literally eating shit, and you're supposed to be proud and happy of that. So when we emulate the process of having physical shit, mental shit, and spiritual shit in our diet in 2022, there is a problem. We have to let go of other people's shit and have our own development, our own life cycle. So I want to just close in saying that as black people, as African people, and particularly today's topic, as a black father, we owe it to ourselves to have accountability amongst who we are, and what we should represent.
Yes.
And that is living for the people. And
Yes.
with that, I
Yes.
say all power to people. Pass it to Kodak.
All right. Very well said, Brother Robert. With that being said, I don't want to take any thoughts away from what Brother Robert Ward just stated. And instead, I want to go ahead and thank um, Brother James for hosting us, having me as a guest on the show. Hopefully, I get a chance to come back. Very, very good discussion. I think it's very, very important that we hold these kind of discussions within ourselves, especially with the different generations that showed up to this discussion to put their input in. Very, very important. Also, one of the things, just to leave everybody food for thought, is there's a reason we're talking about the music industry, but if it's something that can be relatable across the board in terms of society being the most influential people of society. And I want to point out there's an age group, there's an age range. The age range goes from anywhere from 16 to about 25 years old in terms of who is the most influential, who can be the most impactful, who are the trendsetters. Look at things like Twitter, we look at things like everything. Any trend that begins, it is not coming from top. It is coming from that age range, 16 to about 25. So when we talk about making change within our society and our communities, I feel like that's what we need to target. Target that group, and you make whatever the change that we're trying to influence, whether it's to be that leader, that father in the household, whether it's to be leaders of the community, whether it's to um, exterminate the fear, you have to address that group. That group will take it and carry it for you and are the biggest promoters of anything that we put out there that there is. But older folks, people have their own opinions. Young people have their opinions about older folks. That's just like the music industry. Once you get over a certain age, you don't make music like that anymore. You might go on tour for the older folks, but the reality is they're looking for the next generation. They're looking for the next sound, and it's so we always have to look at our youth. And I'm not referring to childhood. I'm talking about teen to about 16 to about 25 years old. Those are the most, in my opinion, the most impactful. Those are the people that need us to lead them the most. And with that being said, I want to say as well, all power to the people.
Well, thank everyone for joining us tonight. Kodak, you can come back anytime. Open mic whenever you want to come back. You and Mr. Williams can work that out. We have no problem with that. And thank everyone for coming tonight. And I think my final thought is we need more dads in our communities. Fathers are very I mean, father's a word. A dad actually, to me, has an influence as well as a lasting, uh, uh, tremendous uh, value, not only to the family, but to the future generations. So let's concentrate on having more dads out there, and we'll worry about the finances and things like that. But we need to raise a generation of young men that uh, know and are willing to accept their responsibility. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Appreciate it. And I will see everyone next
Peace and love
Monday.
till the next time to everybody. Good night.
All right.
Power.
It's a pleasure meeting you, Brother Kodak.